Welcome to Wife Cheating Story. I hope you have an enjoyable and relaxing time listening. Let's get started.
She kissed me goodbye every morning, but her lips were already tasting another life. The perfume wasn't hers, the late nights weren't work, and those earrings, I never bought them. A stranger's shadow crept into my home, my bed, my marriage. When I followed her, it wasn't a gallery she went to, it was him. She thought I'd crumble, but betrayal doesn't break a man. It sharpens him. And now, I have a plan. Cruel, precise. I'll make her watch everything she traded me for burn to ashes. This isn't heartbreak, it's justice. And justice is best served with the cold precision of revenge. Lucas Reed woke up feeling colder than usual, though the thermostat claimed it was a steady 68 degrees. It wasn't just physical cold, there was a distinct emotional chill that had settled in the house. He noticed it first in subtle ways. The absence of Emily's gentle hand on his shoulder, the way she no longer leaned over to kiss him before dashing out for her morning run, the sound of doors closing too softly, as if she was trying not to be heard. He turned onto his back, staring at the ceiling fan as it made slow, lazy rotations. The morning light seeped through the blinds, dust motes drifting like tiny, aimless ghosts. Lucas listened for the noises he used to love, the kettle whistling on the stove, the low hum of Emily's voice as she scrolled through her phone at the kitchen island, maybe the shuffle of her slippers against the hardwood floor. Today, and for the last few weeks, there was none of that, just silence, and the slight creak of the house settling. Rubbing his eyes, he slid out of bed. He noticed Emily's side was neatly made, the comforter smooth and the pillow fluffed. She'd been rising earlier and earlier, leaving the house before he had a chance to say good morning. The pattern was too consistent to be just coincidence. In the bathroom, he found her hair straightener unplugged, a few strands of her blonde hair curled in its bristles. The sink was dry, the towels folded. Everything looked unused, yet he knew she'd been here. She must have woken at dawn, dressed, and disappeared without a sound. Downstairs, the kitchen felt staged. The smell of coffee once lured him down every morning. Now he had to brew it himself. He flipped open the cabinet, pulled out a bag of beans, and ground them, trying to recall the last time Emily had sat across from him at breakfast. Maybe a month ago? She used to love their quiet domestic mornings, he with his laptop or newspaper, she with her journal, scribbling down to-do lists or sketching ideas for home decor. He poured coffee into a mug and took a tentative sip. Bitter and hot, it snapped him into a clearer state of mind. Lucas had spent the last few weeks doing mental gymnastics to justify Emily's behavior. Work stress, maybe? She'd mentioned wanting a hobby, something to re-spark her creativity. Was she attending an early morning yoga class? He'd asked once, offhand, and she responded vaguely, "Yeah, just something I'm trying out." When he tried to follow up, she changed the subject. Still holding his mug, Lucas drifted into the living room and glanced around. Their suburban home outside of San Francisco was spacious, but not huge 3 bedrooms, an office he used for remote work, and a backyard that once hosted family barbecues. Now it felt oddly hollow. The artwork Emily had chosen soft watercolors and serene landscapes, stared back at him as if accusing him of something he couldn't name. He remembered when their children, Mia and Jacob, were teenagers running up and down the stairs, yelling about the Wi-Fi or who'd get the car that night. Now Mia, 25, was an architect working long hours downtown, and Jacob, 22, was a robotics engineer who'd recently moved out. Both still checked in often, Mia sending him texts about new building projects, Jacob swinging by to fix something around the house. They'd both mentioned that Emily seemed distant, but he'd shrugged it off as a phase. He couldn't shrug it off now. The silence was getting oppressive. Lucas decided to break it by heading outside. He grabbed his keys and stepped onto the front porch. The neighborhood was still shaking off the last of dawn's chill. Across the street, their neighbor, Margaret, a friendly retiree, bent over her rose bushes. She waved at Lucas. "Morning, Lucas. You're up early," she called, her voice crackling a bit with age. She wore a wide-brimmed hat and gardening gloves. "Morning, Margaret," Lucas replied, trying to sound casual. He leaned on the porch railing. "Yeah, thought I'd get a head start on the day." Margaret looked around as if expecting to see Emily. You two heading out for one of your drives today? Didn't you usually go to the farmer's market on Wednesdays? Lucas stiffened. They had a tradition. Yes, Wednesday farmer's markets. Stalls with fresh peaches, artisan bread, Emily flirting with the idea of buying a new jam flavor. But Emily hadn't joined him for weeks. He'd gone once by himself, but the experience felt hollow, so he stopped. "Oh, Emily's busy with something this morning," he said, careful to keep his tone light. Margaret gave him a knowing look. "Well, I'm sure everything's fine. Sometimes people get busy." Then she bent back to her roses and Lucas retreated inside. He sat down at the kitchen island, phone in hand, and considered texting Emily. He pulled up their last text thread. It had grown cold, mostly logistical notes like, "I'll be home late. Don't wait up. Had dinner already." No jokes, no check-ins about his day. It was as if they were two roommates who occasionally updated each other's schedules. By late morning, Lucas was settled in his home office, a small corner room overlooking the backyard. He had a Zoom call with a few team members at his tech company. He was still CEO, though he'd been quietly thinking about stepping down. He'd built the company from scratch alongside his longtime friend and partner, Ethan Carter. They developed software solutions for biotech labs, efficient, lucrative, and stable. He should have been proud, happy even. But now the idea of the future felt shaky. On the call, Ethan's face appeared first. Dark glasses, graying hair at the temples, a steady grin that had reassured Lucas countless times over the years. He gave Lucas a careful look. "You all right, man? You look a little pale." Lucas forced a smile. "I'm fine, just didn't sleep well." Two other team members joined, and they started discussing the upcoming product rollout. But Lucas found it hard to concentrate. He wondered what Emily was doing. Maybe he should have asked her more directly what was bothering her. Instead, he'd gone passive, hoping normalcy would return on its own. He mentally scolded himself and tried to refocus on the meeting's agenda. After wrapping up business discussions, Ethan lingered. "Lucas, you sure everything's okay? Emily doing all right?" It wasn't unusual for Ethan to ask. He'd known them as a couple for decades. Lucas cleared his throat. "I'm not entirely sure," he said softly, stepping away so the others wouldn't hear. "She's been distant. Leaves early, comes home late, not saying much. Just feels off." Ethan's concerned look deepened. "Do you think it's work-related? Or maybe she's found a new hobby, something she's not ready to talk about?" Lucas shrugged. "I don't know, man. I'm going to keep an eye on things." The conversation ended without resolution, leaving Lucas with a sour pit in his stomach. The rest of the day dragged. He sent Emily a text around noon. "Hey, haven't seen you this morning. Everything okay?" No response by lunchtime. By 2 in the afternoon, he gave up waiting and heated leftover pasta for himself. He found himself examining tiny details around the house, the way Emily's coat was no longer on the hook by the front door. The way her favorite teacup, a floral porcelain mug, remained unused on the top shelf. He noticed a strange scent lingering near her vanity table upstairs, something floral but unfamiliar, like a new perfume. She never mentioned buying new perfume. That evening, as dusk settled, Lucas heard the sound of the garage door. He rushed downstairs, feeling a strange knot of anticipation. Emily entered wearing a crisp white blouse and a pair of black slacks, carrying a large tote bag. Her hair was pinned back neatly, but a few loose strands framed her face. She looked more composed than someone who'd been at an office all day. She offered a tight smile when she saw Lucas. "You're home," he said, trying not to sound accusatory. "Yeah," she replied, slipping off her shoes. "Long day." Lucas waited, hoping she might elaborate. When she didn't, he asked, "Everything all right? You left so early this morning I didn't get a chance to say goodbye." Emily moved into the kitchen, placed her tote bag on the counter. "I had some errands. Look, I'm tired. Can we talk later?" He swallowed, nodding. "Of course. Are you hungry? I could make something or order in?" "No, I grabbed something earlier." She didn't look at him when she said it. Instead, she started rifling through the mail. Bills, a catalog, a postcard from Mia about some new building she was excited to work on. "I'm going upstairs," Emily said after a moment, not waiting for him to respond. Lucas stood there, the refrigerator humming quietly behind him. He considered following her, pushing the issue, but something in her posture, that rigid line of her shoulders, warned him off. He sighed and settled into the couch. On the TV, some newscaster rattled off current events he barely registered. The next morning played out similarly. Lucas woke before his alarm, hoping to catch Emily, but her car was already gone. A faint scent of her shampoo lingered in the bathroom. He pressed his hand against the tile where her towel usually hung. It was dry. She must have showered hours ago. Growing uneasy, he decided to reach out to their daughter. Mia picked up on the third ring, sounding breathless. "Dad? Everything okay?" He could hear city traffic in the background. "Hey, sweetie. Yeah, I'm fine," Lucas began, then paused. He didn't want to alarm Mia. "Just wanted to see how you're doing. We haven't talked in a week or so." Mia hesitated. "I'm good, just busy with a new project. How's Mom?" Lucas swallowed. The mention of Emily's name sent a pinch of anxiety through his chest. "She's fine, I guess. A bit distant lately. Have you noticed anything off?" Mia sighed. "I was going to ask you the same thing. Last time I called, she sounded rushed. She said she'd call me back but never did." "I see," Lucas said quietly. "I'm sure it's just something temporary." Mia didn't push it. "If you need anything, let me know, Dad. Maybe you should talk to her directly. Be honest about what you're feeling." "Yeah, I'll do that," Lucas replied, though he wasn't entirely confident he could muster the courage. Over the next few days, the pattern intensified. Emily's presence in the home became almost spectral. She left early, returned late, barely said a word. She started locking her phone or keeping it in her bag, something she'd never bothered to do before. They used to share playlists, send each other funny memes, and now he couldn't remember the last time he'd seen her scrolling comfortably by his side. One night, Lucas decided to wait up for her. He pretended to be engrossed in a documentary on Netflix, but his eyes kept drifting to the clock. 11 p.m., 11:30, midnight. Finally, at midnight, he heard her key in the door. She stepped in quietly as if hoping he was asleep. "Oh, you're still up," she said flatly. "Yeah, couldn't sleep," he said, trying to keep his voice even. "Where were you? It's late." She hesitated, and in that pause, Lucas felt something break inside him. She was searching for a plausible answer. "I was out with Caroline," she finally said. "She's been going through a tough time. Needed some company." Caroline. The name was familiar. Emily had mentioned her a few times, a new friend from the art gallery Emily had begun volunteering at. Lucas found it odd Emily had started volunteering there without much discussion, but at the time, he'd seen it as a positive sign. Something to bring her joy. Caroline was described as fun, adventurous, and open-minded. Emily said Caroline encouraged her to appreciate modern art, helped her pick out a few abstract prints. Now the mention of Caroline made him uneasy. "Caroline," he repeated, tasting the name. "You've been spending a lot of time with her. I hardly know anything about her. Maybe we could all have dinner sometime?" Emily shrugged out of her jacket, carefully not meeting his gaze. "I don't know. She's kind of private. And she's still recovering from a nasty divorce. I don't think she's up for meeting new people right now." Something about Emily's tone suggested he should drop it, but Lucas couldn't. I feel like we're drifting apart. You barely talk to me. You're out at odd hours. I'm worried." She turned to face him then, and he noticed how guarded her expression had become. "I'm sorry you feel that way," she said, voice cool. "I'm just figuring some things out. It's not about you." That line stung. Of course it was about him. Their marriage was a partnership. If she was figuring things out and he wasn't involved, didn't that mean their bond had weakened? She must have seen the pain in his face because she sighed. "Lucas, can we not do this right now? I'm tired. I have an early morning tomorrow." He let her go, but the seeds of doubt were now firmly planted. He began to observe more closely. Her new perfume bottle hidden in the back of a drawer, receipts tucked in her purse for meals. At times she claimed to be at the gallery, and once he caught a glimpse of a pair of earrings on her dresser, ones he'd never seen before. They weren't her style, more modern and flashy than the understated jewelry she usually wore. A few days later, he decided to stop by the art gallery where Emily volunteered, hoping to understand her new environment. It was a small place downtown, run by an eccentric curator named Cheryl. He'd met Cheryl once at a local fundraiser. She was polite, if a bit aloof. When he arrived, mid-afternoon, the gallery was quiet. Tall white walls, minimalistic sculptures, bright abstract paintings. A young woman at the front desk eyed him curiously. "Hello, can I help you?" she asked, voice echoing slightly in the open space. "I'm looking for Emily Reed. She volunteers here," Lucas said, trying to sound casual as if he was just dropping by. The young woman's face went blank. "Emily Reed, I'm not sure. Let me check." She tapped at her computer, frowning. "We have a few volunteers, but I don't recall Emily Reed. Are you sure it's this gallery?" Lucas's heart sank. "She said it was the Westbrook Gallery. This is Westbrook, right?" "Yes, sir. I've been managing volunteers for a month now, and I haven't met an Emily Reed." She looked apologetic. "Maybe she comes in on a day I'm off." Lucas forced a smile. "Maybe. Sorry to bother you." He left, heart pounding. Emily had lied about volunteering here. Why? Was she volunteering at all or just using that as an excuse? That evening, he tried to catch her off guard. "How was the gallery today?" he asked as she came in. She blinked, removing her shoes slowly. "It was fine. We got a new installation. Caroline and I loved it." Lucas clenched his jaw, forcing a neutral expression. He didn't call her out yet. He needed more information before confronting her. Something was very wrong, and he was determined to figure it out. Over the next few days, he began checking small details. He noted times she left, times she returned, and tried calling her at odd hours. She rarely picked up. Texts got one-word responses. He even glanced at their joint bank account, nothing unusual, but he noticed she withdrew cash more often. For a woman who rarely used cash, that was suspicious. One weekend afternoon, Jacob dropped by unannounced. The tension in the house was almost visible, like a fine mist. Emily was out again. Jacob sat at the kitchen island sipping a soda. He eyed his father. "Dad, you seem off. Mom seems off. Something going on?" Lucas exhaled slowly. "I'm not sure. She's been distant, secretive. She claims to be volunteering at a gallery, but I stopped by and they'd never heard of her." Jacob's eyebrows shot up. "That's weird. Do you think she's having an affair or something?" He said it bluntly, in that way young adults often do, startling Lucas. Lucas closed his eyes, trying to stay calm. "I don't know. I don't want to jump to conclusions." Jacob patted his father's shoulder. "Maybe just talk to her directly, Dad. Don't let it fester." But every time Lucas tried, Emily dodged. She was tired, busy, stressed. She blamed work, her new project, Caroline's needs. The vague excuses piled up until they became impossible to ignore. He began noticing that Emily always guarded her phone now, slipping it into her tote whenever he got close. Once, when she was in the shower, he tried to glance at her phone on the nightstand. It was locked, as always, but a notification lit up the screen. A name he didn't recognize and a message that vanished too quickly to read. When she emerged, he casually asked if Caroline had texted her. Emily stiffened. "No, why?" "Just curious," Lucas said, keeping his tone light, but his mind raced. As the days turned into a tense pattern of avoidance and suspicion, Lucas found himself trapped in a slow-motion film. Every moment elongated, every silence stretched tight like a rubber band about to snap. The house, once a source of comfort, now felt like a stage set for a drama he never asked to star in. He kept recalling the early years with Emily, lazy Sundays in bed, finishing each other's sentences, holding hands under dinner tables. Where had that gone? Finally, late one night, he found a pair of earrings in her purse. They sparkled under the kitchen light as he held them, confusion and hurt twisting inside him. He'd never seen them before, never gifted them to her, and they weren't her style. These looked expensive, too. Who gave them to her, and why was she hiding them? Lucas heard the garage door, the distant rumble of Emily's return. He slipped the earrings back but kept the receipt he found tucked next to them. A receipt from a fancy French restaurant downtown, dated 2 nights ago. He hadn't been out with her in weeks. Who took her there? As Emily stepped into the kitchen, Lucas stood holding the receipt. He watched her stiffen, her eyes darting from his face to the small piece of paper in his hand. Her mouth opened, closed, then opened again. In that charged silence, Lucas knew they had reached a turning point, the moment where denial could no longer hold back the truth. Lucas stood at the kitchen island, the small piece of paper trembling slightly between his fingers. On its surface, the name of a French restaurant, La Veraison, was printed in elegant script, accompanied by a date he recognized as 2 nights prior. The total was for a lavish dinner for 2. Emily had just stepped into the house, keys jangling in her hand. Under the warm overhead light, her face looked drawn, as if the day had taken more from her than usual. She noticed the receipt immediately, her gaze flicking from Lucas's tight-set jaw to the thin paper in his grip. Her eyes widened for a split second, then narrowed, as if calculating her next move. The silence stretched, thick and tense, the hum of the refrigerator sounding absurdly loud in the background. "Where did you find that?" Emily asked, dropping her keys more loudly than she intended onto the counter. "In your purse," Lucas answered, his voice low and controlled. He felt a knot in his throat. It hurt to speak. He wanted to scream, to demand answers, but forced himself to keep calm. "I also found earrings I've never seen before, not your usual style. Care to explain?" Emily pressed her lips together and ran a hand through her hair, which looked slightly tousled, as if she'd been running her fingers through it nervously before entering the house. She didn't respond right away. Outside, a car door slammed, maybe one of their neighbors, and the sound made her flinch. "Lucas," she started, voice unsteady, "I don't know what you're thinking." "Try me," he said, cutting her off. He didn't normally interrupt her, but tonight he didn't have the patience for her dodges. He laid the receipt on the counter, flattening it with his palm. "You haven't been yourself. You leave early, you come home late, you barely look me in the eye. You say you're volunteering at a gallery, but I checked they've never heard of you, and now I find this. What am I supposed to think?" Emily's eyes filled with something like panic. She turned away from him, stepping to the sink, staring out the window into the darkness. He watched her shoulders rise and fall as if she was struggling to catch her breath. "Look at me," Lucas said, voice quieter now, but insistent. "Whatever's going on, I need the truth." When she finally turned, her expression was conflicted. "I never wanted it to be this way," she whispered. Lucas's stomach sank. He recognized that line from too many stories of infidelity and betrayal. "You never wanted what to be this way?" A tense beat passed. Emily folded her arms, hugging herself as if cold. "I've been unhappy, Lucas," she said. "For a long time, I felt ignored. You were always busy with the company, your meetings, your future plans that never seemed to include me in the way I wanted. I met someone. He could have sworn the kitchen's warm light dimmed even though it didn't. The world narrowed to just the 2 of them in this ugly revelation. Someone?" he repeated, voice hollow. "His name is Ryan," she said, barely above a whisper. "We met at an art event. Caroline introduced us." She paused, flinching at her own admission. He made me feel seen again." Lucas's mind snagged on Caroline's name, the so-called friend he barely knew, the one who Emily always claimed was going through her own troubles. He should have known Caroline was a bad influence. Emily had mentioned her flippantly, never letting Lucas get too close. He remembered hearing rumors from neighbors. Caroline loved drama, stirred trouble, had a history of encouraging friends to step out of their marriages. Lucas's jaw tightened. "And so you've been what? Dating this Ryan behind my back?" Lucas asked, the words tasting bitter. He wanted to keep his voice steady, but it cracked at the end. Emily looked down at the floor. "It started slowly. We met up for coffee, just talking. I told myself it was harmless. Then he invited me to dinner." She gestured vaguely towards the receipt. "I know it's awful. I know how it looks. I didn't mean for it to happen, but I wanted to feel alive again." Lucas stood still, the weight of her words pressing on his chest. He pictured Emily laughing with Ryan over a fancy meal, Ryan leaning in, telling her things that made her smile in a way Lucas hadn't seen in months. Rage and hurt mingled in his gut. But beneath it all, there was a profound sadness. "Why not talk to me, Emily?" he asked, voice softer now. We could have worked on this. We could have tried counseling. Anything. Instead, you did this. Emily's eyes glistened with tears. I'm sorry, I really am, she said, voice trembling. But I think I'm past the point of trying. Lucas, I'm not just seeing him, I'm leaving with him. He blinked, stunned by the bluntness of it. You're leaving, he echoed. The word dropped like a stone in a well, vanishing into darkness. She nodded, tears now escaping and running down her cheeks. I've made up my mind. Ryan and we're going to start over somewhere else. Some small, desperate part of Lucas wanted to laugh at the insanity of her words. Instead, he stared at her. This was the woman he'd spent decades with, raised children with, built a life with. Just like that, he managed to say, his voice almost calm. You're walking out? Emily looked pained. I've already taken half the savings. It's all arranged. Please don't make this harder than it is. Don't make this harder than it is. As if her betrayal wasn't already shattering him. Lucas felt a strange detachment wash over him. He looked around the kitchen, at the glossy countertops they picked out together, the photograph of their family trip to Lake Tahoe stuck to the fridge door, Mia and Jacob's younger faces smiling back. His entire life's foundation was crumbling. He tried to speak, but for a moment, no words came. Outside, a car idled at the curb. Lucas realized it must be Ryan. He couldn't see the car from here, but the low hum of an engine drifted through the quiet suburban air. Emily shifted her weight, looking uneasy as if expecting him to explode. But Lucas didn't explode. Instead, he asked quietly, Do Mia and Jacob know? Emily shook her head, voice barely above a whisper. No, I was going to tell them later. I couldn't face them yet. His heart twisted at the thought of their children's reactions. Mia would be furious, protective of her father. Jacob would be shocked and withdrawn, probably. They loved their mother, but this would hurt them deeply. Go, then, Lucas said, surprising himself with how steady his voice sounded. He didn't know where the calm came from, perhaps shock, perhaps a deep well of self-control. If that's what you've decided, just go. Emily looked at him, guilt and regret etched into her face, and after a moment, she moved towards the front door. Lucas followed her silently, watching as she picked up a small suitcase he hadn't noticed before. It must have been by the entryway, hidden in the shadows. She opened the door. The night air rushed in, carrying the scent of distant lawns and someone's late barbecue. On the sidewalk, a sleek black sedan waited with its headlights off. He couldn't make out the driver's face, but he knew who it was. Goodbye, Emily said, voice cracking. She lingered as if waiting for him to say something that would save them both. But Lucas said nothing. Finally, she stepped outside, closing the door gently behind her. The silence that followed was suffocating. Lucas pressed his forehead against the cool wood of the door, his chest tight. He wanted to scream, to punch something, to beg her to come back. But he did none of that. Instead, he stumbled into the living room and sank onto the couch, staring at the blank TV screen. That's where he sat for God knew how long, the dark house pressing in on him. The next morning, Lucas woke up on that same couch, his neck stiff and his heart heavy. He went upstairs to find their bedroom eerily neat, as if Emily had never existed in it. Some of her clothes were gone, but she left plenty behind. Maybe she planned to send for them later. The bedside table, where her reading glasses and favorite books usually lay, was now bare. At mid-morning, he forced himself to call Mia. He didn't want her hearing the news from anyone else. She picked up after a few rings, breathless again. Hey, Dad, what's up? She asked cheerfully, clearly not expecting the bombshell he was about to drop. Lucas swallowed. Mia, I need to tell you something. Your mother left me last night. His voice sounded strange to his own ears, like someone else was speaking through him. Silence on the other end, then a sharp intake of breath. What do you mean left? Like, she's gone for a trip, or... She's gone, Lucas said flatly, rubbing his temples. She took half our savings and went off with another man. Mia let out a disbelieving laugh, which quickly turned into something else, a pained sound. What? Are you serious? Dad, this has to be a misunderstanding. I wish it was. Lucas closed his eyes. I'm sorry to spring this on you. I know it's a shock. Mia's voice trembled. She wouldn't do that. She's always been so dedicated. Are you sure? He wanted to be gentle, but reality didn't allow it. Yes, she admitted it. She met someone else and left. Mia's silence was heavy and sad. Eventually she said, "I'll be over tonight. Okay, Dad? We'll figure this out." Lucas nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "Thanks, Mia." He hung up, knowing he still had to call Jacob. That conversation was equally difficult. Jacob responded with stunned quiet, a single, "I'm on my way," before hanging up. Lucas put his phone down, stared at the family photo on the mantel, the same photo he'd looked at the night before. Now it felt like a relic of a time that would never return. By the afternoon, both children arrived. Mia marched in first, her face set with grim determination. She was dressed in her work clothes tailored slacks, a crisp blouse, but had clearly left the office in a hurry, given her slightly mussed hair. Jacob followed, hands shoved into his jacket pockets, looking pale. "What the hell happened?" Mia demanded, voice already shaking. She scanned the living room as if searching for clues. Lucas tried to explain calmly. He told them about the distant behavior, the suspicious signs, and finally, the confrontation and Emily's admission. He kept it concise, not wanting to recount every painful detail. As he spoke, Mia's face hardened with anger, and Jacob looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. Mia paced near the window. "So, she just left with this Ryan guy? Who is he anyway?" Lucas shook his head. "I don't know. He's somehow connected to Caroline, that friend of your mother's. I never met him." Jacob kicked at the base of the couch, frustrated tears in his eyes. "This doesn't make sense. Mom always told me honesty was the key to a good relationship. Now she does this?" Mia sat down heavily beside Lucas. "I'm so sorry, Dad. How are you holding up?" Lucas wanted to say something reassuring, to show strength, but all he managed was a weak shrug. "I feel numb. Angry, but mostly numb." They sat in silence for a while, the three of them, a broken family trying to make sense of their new reality. Eventually, Jacob offered to order takeout. No one had the heart to cook. Mia made a call to her fiancé, Daniel, explaining she'd be late. The evening passed in a haze of quiet conversation, shock, and attempts at comfort. In the days that followed, Lucas immersed himself in his work at the tech company. He hid in spreadsheets, product proposals, and conference calls, trying to shove the pain aside. But every so often he'd catch himself staring out the window of his office, remembering Emily's final goodbye. The bitterness was there, simmering just beneath his stoic surface. Ethan Carter, his business partner, noticed the change. During one late afternoon strategy meeting, Ethan leaned over after the younger team members had left. "Lucas, I heard some rumors, something about Emily leaving?" He looked genuinely concerned. Lucas stiffened. He realized he hadn't told anyone at work. The rumor mill must have started turning. Maybe Mia mentioned it to someone, or perhaps Emily had talked to somebody who blabbed. "Yeah, she left," he said, keeping it short. Ethan's face fell. "I'm sorry. That's got to be tough." He rested a hand on Lucas's shoulder. "If you need time off or anything, I'm good." Lucas lied. "I prefer to keep busy." Ethan nodded, respecting the boundary. But as they wrapped up the meeting, Ethan hesitated. "Lucas, just remember there's a world outside these walls. Don't bury yourself in work to avoid dealing with what happened." Lucas gave a tense half-smile. Ethan was right, but right now, reality hurt too much to face head-on. One evening, about a week after Emily's departure, Mia and Jacob convinced Lucas to have dinner at a new bistro downtown. They wanted to pull him out of the house, get him somewhere with normal people, normal conversation. The bistro was small, with dim lighting and a chalkboard menu listing the day's specials. They sat at a corner table, sipping water while waiting for their orders. Mia tried to chat about her latest project. She was designing a series of sustainable apartment complexes, and Jacob mentioned his upcoming assignment at a robotics firm. Lucas appreciated their efforts, though he struggled to fully engage. Halfway through the meal, Mia leaned forward. "Dad, have you thought about what you'll do next? I mean about the house, your retirement plans. You've been talking about selling the company. Maybe this is a sign to start fresh." Lucas looked down at his napkin, running his finger along its edge. He had thought about it late at night when he couldn't sleep. He and Emily had planned a grand retirement somewhere picturesque, maybe Tuscany, they used to say, sipping wine under the Italian sun. Now that dream was shattered. "I'm not sure yet," Lucas said quietly. "But you're right. I can't pretend nothing's changed." Jacob set his fork down. "I know this is painful, Dad, but maybe you can make something new out of this mess. You always told us that when something breaks, you can rebuild it into something better." Lucas managed a small, genuine smile. Hearing those words from his son, he felt a spark of determination. He nodded slowly, turning the thought over in his mind. Meanwhile, Emily's absence made waves in their social circle. Margaret, the neighbor with the rose garden, stopped by one afternoon with a plate of cookies. She cleared her throat awkwardly. "Lucas, dear, I just wanted to say I'm sorry about what happened. I know it's none of my business, but you two seemed so solid. If you need anything, just knock." Lucas thanked her, swallowing past the lump in his throat. He felt touched by the small kindnesses. Other neighbors waved a bit more sympathetically in the mornings, and a few friends texted words of support. It made him feel less alone, though not less hurt. One evening, as he sorted through old photographs, he found himself wondering about this Ryan character. Who was he exactly? Why did Emily trust him enough to run off? Caroline's involvement gnawed at him too. He knew so little about her, just that Emily started hanging out with her a few months back. He considered the idea of confronting Caroline, demanding answers, but what good would it do now? Emily was gone, and he'd only rubbed salt in his own wounds. Still, the curiosity lingered. He thought about hiring a private investigator, someone to dig up Ryan's background. The idea made him feel a grim satisfaction. If he couldn't save his marriage, maybe he could understand why it fell apart. He tucked the thought away for later, unsure if he'd act on it. Not long after, Lucas learned through a mutual acquaintance, Darren, a client who had once bumped into Lucas and Emily at social events, that Emily and Ryan had moved into a small apartment in a less expensive part of town. "I saw her at a grocery store near my place," Darren said over the phone, voice low, as if sharing a secret. "She looked not great, honestly, like she'd been crying." Lucas's chest tightened, a confusing mix of emotions swirling inside him. Part of him wanted her to suffer for what she'd done. Another part felt pity and sorrow, and yet another part wanted to remain numb, not to care at all. He thanked Darren tersely and hung up. That night Mia called, her tone gentle. "Dad, I know this is none of my business, but do you want to reach out to Mom? She might be struggling." "I'm not saying you should forgive her or anything, just maybe talking would help both of you." Lucas rubbed a hand over his face. "I don't know, Mia. She made her choice. I gave her a chance to explain herself. She walked out." Mia was quiet for a moment. "Okay, I understand. Just know that I love you, and Jacob loves you, and will support whatever you decide." "Thanks, sweetie," he said softly, grateful for their loyalty. After that call, Lucas went into the bedroom and stared at his reflection in the mirror. He looked older, lines of stress carving deeper paths on his face. He realized he hadn't really allowed himself to feel the full anger yet, so he let it wash over him. He clenched his fists and swore softly, pacing the room. Why had Emily chosen some stranger's arms over the life they built? Why hadn't she fought for what they had? He slammed his hand on the dresser, rattling a picture frame. The emotion left as quickly as it came, leaving him hollow again. A week later, Lucas took a day off work to deal with personal matters. He visited the bank, finalized some paperwork, and sat down with a financial advisor to understand the impact of Emily taking half their savings. The advisor, a middle-aged woman named Nicole, was sympathetic but professional. "You still have considerable assets," she said gently, "and with your company shares, you'll be all right. But if you're planning to sell the company soon, we should strategize." Lucas nodded, feeling strangely numb and focused at once. Without Emily, the plan they had retirement abroad no longer made sense. Maybe Sonoma, California, would offer him something quieter. He'd always enjoyed the few vineyard tours he'd taken. It appealed to him now, a place to breathe, to think, to start fresh. He didn't make a decision yet, but the seed was planted. On his way home from the bank, he stopped at a coffee shop he and Emily once frequented. He hadn't set foot inside since she left. The familiar aroma of coffee and baked goods tugged at old memories. He ordered a latte and sat near the window. Outside, life went on. The world didn't stop because his marriage collapsed. Cars drove by, people chatted on their phones, a couple laughed over pastries at a corner table. He felt oddly detached, like watching a movie in slow motion, each moment drawn out and fragile. He took out his phone and scrolled through contacts. He paused at Emily's name. His finger hovered over the call button, then retreated. Not yet, he told himself. He wouldn't give her the satisfaction of hearing him broken. Instead, he texted Mia. Thinking about future plans. Might consider a change of scenery. Let's talk soon. Mia responded with a thumbs up and a heart, simple but comforting. Late that night, unable to sleep, Lucas walked through the halls of his home. He ended up in the study, where he kept personal files and old albums. Pulling out a manila folder, he sorted through documents related to his company. He found a brochure he once saved an ad for a vineyard property in Sonoma. He'd laughed at it then, telling Emily it was just a pipe dream. Now, it didn't seem so crazy. He pictured himself among the vines, the quiet rows of grapes beneath a California sun, a simpler life free from corporate boardrooms and painful memories. He imagined meeting new people who didn't know his baggage, forging new friendships with honesty as a baseline. For a flicker of a moment, the idea made him feel hopeful. As the clock pushed towards midnight, he stood by the window and thought about Emily somewhere in a cramped apartment, maybe realizing her grand affair wasn't as romantic as she dreamed. He wondered if she felt regret gnawing at her. The bitterness crept in again. If she thought he'd crumble and beg her to return, she underestimated him. He might be hurting, but he wasn't powerless. He had resources, connections, and a will to protect himself and his family's legacy. He envisioned a future confrontation, one where he was calm, in control, and she was the one on unsure footing. Maybe not now, but someday he'd make sure Ryan paid for his role in this. Lucas wouldn't stoop to cheap tricks, but he wasn't above using his business acumen to expose a fraud if that's what Ryan turned out to be. He suspected Ryan was no stable partner, just a pretty face with a persuasive tongue. Before heading to bed, Lucas wrote in a small notebook he kept in his desk drawer. It was something he hadn't done in years, but words poured out. She left. I'm still here. I'm still standing. Everything feels shattered, but I can choose what to do with the pieces. I won't be defined by her betrayal. I'll find my own path, and if I must, I'll make sure that those who wronged me face consequences. For now, I breathe, I endure. Tomorrow, I rebuild. He closed the notebook and slipped it into the drawer. Tonight, he would let himself sleep, knowing that this was not the end of his story, only the end of a chapter he never asked to be rewritten. Lucas Reed stood in his home office, the afternoon light casting long shadows across the hardwood floor. He'd spent the last half hour staring at a map of California's wine country taped to the wall. A small red circle marked the vineyard property he'd been eyeing in Sonoma. He had no business running a vineyard, he was a tech entrepreneur after all. But something about this idea felt right. Maybe it was the thought of quiet mornings, or the smell of earth and grapes, or just the chance to be anywhere but this house, this town, where memories of Emily lurked in every corner. He took a breath and dialed Ethan Carter's number. His business partner picked up on the second ring. "Lucas, hey," Ethan said, voice crackling slightly on speakerphone. "I was about to call you. The board wants to finalize the details on next quarter's roadmap." Lucas swallowed, fingers drumming on the desk. "Ethan, about that," he began, forcing his voice to stay steady. "I've decided it's time for me to step away from the company, completely." Silence hummed on the line, then a soft exhale. "I suspected this might be coming," Ethan said carefully. "After what happened with Emily, I figured you'd be looking to change things up. But leaving entirely?" "I've thought it through," Lucas said. He glanced at the old family photo on his desk, one with Emily smiling wide, Mia and Jacob as kids splashing in a lake. It still twisted his heart, but he no longer felt paralyzed by that pain. "I need a fresh start. I'll sell my shares, pass the baton to you or whoever you trust, and I'm done. No hard feelings, just closure." Ethan was silent for a few moments. "This company is your legacy, Lucas. Are you sure? Lucas felt a curious calm settle over him. My legacy isn't tied to an office building. It's tied to how I choose to live. I've made my decision. They talked details for another hour: valuations, legalities, timelines. By the end of the call, Ethan sounded resigned but supportive. I'll set up the necessary meetings. Let's plan on you stepping out gracefully in a month or so. Thanks, Lucas said, and ended the call. A month. Enough time to wrap up, say a few goodbyes, and cut ties with a life he'd once imagined sharing with Emily in retirement. Now, that vision had soured. Instead, he'd find a new purpose on his own terms. That evening, Mia and Jacob came over for dinner. Lucas had ordered takeout from a local Thai place, the scent of lemongrass and chili filling the kitchen. They sat around the dining table, which felt too large now that Emily was gone. Mia tapped her chopsticks nervously against her bowl, while Jacob watched his father's face as if searching for clues. When Lucas told them about his plan, Mia's eyes widened. Sonoma? As in wine country Sonoma? Yes, Lucas said, twirling noodles onto his fork. I'm looking at a property there, a vineyard that needs some care. I've always liked the region. Jacob raised an eyebrow. Dad, you don't know the first thing about running a vineyard. Lucas shrugged. I didn't know anything about building a tech company either. Back when I started, I learned. Besides, I'm not going to run it alone. I'll hire people who know what they're doing. Mia exchanged a glance with Jacob and then nodded slowly. If it makes you happy, she said, then we support you. I mean, it's a big move, but this place, it holds a lot of tough memories now. Jacob leaned forward. Are you sure you're not just running away, Dad? His tone was gentle, not accusatory. Lucas considered the question. Maybe, he said honestly. But sometimes a change of scenery helps you see things clearly, and I need clarity. They ate quietly for a while. Eventually, Mia smiled softly. Well, I can help with any architectural issues. If you need to renovate, add sustainable features, I'm in. Sonoma's known for eco-friendly initiatives. Could be exciting. Jacob nodded, chin resting on his hand. I could help with automation. Maybe even a small robotics setup for the vineyard processes. I heard some places are using drones to monitor crop health. Lucas felt a warmth in his chest. He hadn't even moved yet, and already his children saw a future in this. A family project that could heal old wounds. Thanks, he said, voice thick with emotion. You two mean the world to me. They smiled, and for the first time in a long time, dinner didn't feel like a funeral. It felt like a step forward. 2 weeks later, Lucas visited the Sonoma property for the first time. He'd connected with a real estate agent, Angela Ruiz, who specialized in vineyards and agricultural land. She met him at the gravel driveway in her Subaru, a clipboard in hand and a warm smile on her face. Lucas, nice to meet you in person, Angela said, leading him through a gate flanked by old oak trees. This property's been on the market for a while. Previous owners got overwhelmed. Managing a vineyard isn't easy if you don't have experience, but it has great bones. Lucas took in the view. Rolling hills of grapevines stretching into the distance, a modest farmhouse with faded green shutters, a weathered barn, and a small pond reflecting the midday sun. The place radiated quiet potential. He followed Angela up the porch steps of the farmhouse. Inside, the room smelled faintly of citrus polish. Furniture was sparse: a sofa, a couple of wooden chairs, and a kitchen table. Nothing fancy, but Lucas liked the simplicity. As they walked outside again, they crossed paths with a man kneeling by a row of vines, his back turned. Angela called out, "Oscar, this is Lucas, the one considering buying the place." Oscar stood slowly, wiping his hands on his worn jeans. He was older, maybe late 60s, with sun-weathered skin and a kind, thoughtful expression. A frayed straw hat shielded his eyes. He extended a hand. "Lucas, I'm Oscar Saldana," he said. His voice was even, calm. "I've been looking after these vines for a decade, through different owners. Happy to show you around if you're serious." Lucas shook his hand, feeling a firm, honest grip. "I am serious," he said. He wasn't entirely sure, but saying it out loud made it feel real. "I'll need guidance, and Angela mentioned you know a lot about this land." Oscar nodded. "I know every vine by name," he said. a hint of a grin curling at the edge of his mouth. "Let's walk." They strolled down a row of vines grapes not yet in season, leaves of vibrant green against the blue sky. Oscar explained the soil quality, irrigation systems, when to prune and harvest. Lucas caught himself imagining early mornings out here with a cup of coffee, listening to birds instead of traffic. After the tour, Lucas returned to the porch with Angela and Oscar. "I'll take it," he said suddenly, surprising even himself. Angela beamed. Oscar gave a curt nod as if he knew this would happen. "I'll get the paperwork started," Angela said, tapping her clipboard. "You won't regret this. This property just needs some love." As Lucas drove back to his old house that evening, he realized he felt lighter than he had in months. He could rebuild something here, away from the echoes of Emily's departure. The sale of the company went smoothly. Ethan organized a farewell gathering, a quiet dinner with key executives at a chic restaurant downtown. At the table, a few younger staff members fidgeted, unsure how to act around the departing founder. Ethan raised a toast. "To Lucas," he said, lifting his wine glass, "a visionary who built this company from the ground up. We wish you the best in your new adventure." They drank, and Lucas managed a smile. He spent part of the evening answering polite questions about his plans. He kept details vague, just said he was shifting gears, looking at a vineyard, embracing a quieter life. Some looked puzzled, others nodded approvingly. By the end of the dinner, Lucas shook hands and said his goodbyes, feeling oddly detached. This had been his world for decades, yet now he felt relieved to let it go. Outside, the city lights glowed. He considered texting Emily. Did she even care what he did now? Probably not. The last he'd heard, she was struggling financially since Ryan wasn't the prince she thought. He felt no urge to gloat. It was just a fact that settled into his mind. Without giving it more thought, he walked away from the restaurant and didn't look back. Moving day came in a flurry of boxes and memories. Mia and Jacob helped him pack. Jacob teased him about the dusty vinyl collection he'd kept since college. Mia insisted on bubble wrapping his old desk lamp, a sentimental gift from Emily on their first anniversary. Lucas hesitated when he saw it. Mia caught his gaze. "Dad, you don't have to keep it," she said gently. Lucas ran a hand over the lamp's metal surface. "No, I'll keep it," he decided. Not everything from the past had to be discarded. He'd accept reminders as long as they didn't hold him back. By afternoon, the moving truck was loaded, and the house felt hollow. Margaret from across the street came over to say goodbye. "I'll miss having you here," she said, wringing her hands. "But I understand. Fresh starts are good." Lucas hugged her, thanked her for her kindness. He gave one last glance at the home where he raised his family, then climbed into his car and followed the truck north, toward Sonoma. The first night in the farmhouse felt strange. The furniture he brought with him barely filled the living room. He set up a cot in what would be his bedroom. He'd figure out the actual furniture later. When darkness fell, he stepped outside with a flashlight. The stars stunned him, scattered like diamonds across a black velvet sky. Back in the city, light pollution dulled them. Here, they shone. He heard the crunch of footsteps on gravel and turned to see Oscar approaching, holding 2 steaming mugs. "Brought some chamomile tea," Oscar said, handing one mug over. "Figured you could use it." Lucas thanked him, taking a careful sip. They stood side by side under the stars, breathing in the night air. "Must be a big change," Oscar said, voice low, "leaving everything behind." Lucas nodded. "I'm still getting used to it, but this place I don't know, it feels honest." Oscar smiled at that. "This land can heal if you let it. Just remember, vines need patience. You can't rush growth." Lucas considered that. Maybe it was a metaphor for his own life. "I'll try to keep that in mind," he said. They finished their tea in silence. Before heading back to his quarters, a small cottage behind the barn, Oscar paused. "You know, the last owners barely spoke to me. You seem different, more open." Lucas looked at him. "I've learned that shutting people out doesn't solve anything." Oscar nodded, then disappeared into the darkness. Over the next few weeks, Lucas settled into a routine. Early mornings were spent walking through the vineyard with Oscar, learning to recognize signs of pests or disease in the leaves. Mid-mornings he worked with the local contractor, Beth, a practical, non-nonsense woman in her 40s who was helping him restore the farmhouse's exterior and fix some irrigation issues. Afternoons were for paperwork, finalizing the sale of his company and sorting out all his finances. By evening, he often sat on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the rolling hills. He got to know a few locals, a couple who ran a small organic farm next door, Bill and Karen, who sold heirloom tomatoes and fresh herbs at the farmer's market. When he first introduced himself, Bill grinned wide. "So, you're the new vineyard guy," he said, pumping Lucas's hand. "Heard Oscar finally got someone who cares." Karen offered him a jar of homemade rosemary garlic butter. "Welcome to the neighborhood. Let us know if you need anything." Such simple kindness felt foreign after the emotional wreckage of the past months. Lucas found himself smiling more, sleeping better, letting go of some of the bitterness that had weighed him down. One late afternoon, Mia called. Lucas sat on the porch steps, phone pressed to his ear. She sounded excited. "Dad, I've been sketching some designs for the farmhouse. What if we add solar panels and a rainwater collection system? It'll make the property eco-friendly and cut costs." Lucas pictured the farmhouse roof with sleek panels catching the sunlight. "I like the idea," he said. "Send me the plans. I might need to hire some local installers, but that's fine." Mia hesitated. "I'd love to come out and help with the initial assessment, if that's okay." Lucas's heart warmed. "Of course. Bring Jacob, too. We can figure out how to integrate his robotics ideas. Maybe drones to monitor vine health?" He could almost hear Mia's grin. "Now you're talking. I'm proud of you, Dad. You're handling all this really well." Lucas exhaled. He wasn't sure if well was accurate, but he appreciated her faith. "I'm trying," he said. "That's all any of us can do." After he hung up, he leaned back and closed his eyes. He wondered what Emily would think if she saw him now, rebuilding a life on land instead of in boardrooms. She was probably too consumed by her own troubles to care. He felt a twinge of pity for her, but it no longer crushed him. He had his own path now. At the end of his first month in Sonoma, Lucas invited Oscar for dinner at the farmhouse. He'd picked up fresh produce from Bill and Karen's farm stand: tomatoes, squash, a few bunches of fragrant basil. In the farmhouse kitchen, he attempted a simple pasta dish. He was no gourmet chef, but he managed to cook something edible. Oscar arrived just after sundown, removing his hat respectfully at the door. "Smells good," he said, taking a seat at the small wooden table. Lucas poured them each a glass of local wine, something Oscar recommended. They sipped, chatted about vineyard maintenance, and enjoyed the meal. After the plates were cleared, Lucas leaned back. "Oscar," he began cautiously, "you've been here a long time. Have you seen many folks come through trying to make a go of it?" Oscar nodded, swirling his wine. "Plenty. Some last a season or two before giving up. Others turn it into a profitable hobby and then move on. Very few make it a life's passion." Lucas studied the older man's face. "What separates those who stay from those who don't?" Oscar smiled wryly. "Patience, resilience, and a willingness to learn. Also, you need a reason beyond money. Vines test you bad weather, pests, market fluctuations. If you're just in it for profit, you'll quit at the first setback." Lucas felt that word resonate. Reason. What was his reason? Healing, perhaps. Finding purpose after betrayal. "I'm not here to get rich," he said slowly. "I'm here to find something I lost." Oscar nodded as if he understood. "You'll find it in time if you keep your eyes open." They sat quietly for a moment. Outside, a gentle breeze stirred the night air. Lucas felt grateful he wasn't alone, that he had a guide who understood the rhythm of this place. Over the next few days, Lucas continued to shape his new life. He arranged for Mia's visit and emailed Jacob about the idea of drones for vine inspection. He contacted a solar installation company and made a tentative appointment. All the while, he immersed himself in learning reading books about viticulture, asking Oscar a million questions, and attending a local workshop on sustainable farming techniques. At the workshop, held in a converted barn a few miles away, he met several local growers: a lavender farmer named Marisol, a beekeeper called Roland who provided honey to local shops, and a couple, Joan and Luis, who specialized in organic olive oil. They welcomed Lucas warmly, curious about the newcomer. Conversation flowed easily over cups of herbal tea. Lucas realized that here, unlike his old city life, people valued community and the simple act of growing something from the earth. Back at the farmhouse, late at night, Lucas sometimes felt a pang of loneliness. Change was hard. He missed the comfort of a familiar routine, even the sound of Emily's voice before everything went wrong. But he reminded himself that this loneliness was different from the hollow emptiness he felt in the house they once shared. Here, loneliness felt like a space waiting to be filled with new experiences and people who might become friends. When the loneliness got too much, he wrote in his notebook, the one he started after Emily left. He scribbled thoughts about the land's beauty, about Oscar's kindness, about Mia and Jacob's enthusiasm. Sometimes he wrote about revenge, the subtle desire to see Ryan taken down. He didn't dwell on it too much, but he allowed himself to fantasize about Ryan failing at whatever schemes he'd pulled, not out of pure malice, but because justice mattered. Ryan had exploited Emily's vulnerability and caused pain. Lucas wouldn't chase vengeance blindly, but he wouldn't shy away from using his resources if a chance presented itself. For now, though, he focused on the vineyard. Each day he felt a bit stronger, more anchored. His muscles ached from physical work helping Oscar repair a fence, carrying supplies for Beth's construction crew, but it was a good ache, reminding him he was alive, rebuilding. One quiet afternoon, a letter arrived from Emily. The envelope bore no return address, just his name and the farmhouse's new mailing address. Lucas hesitated at the mailbox, heart thumping. He walked inside, sat at the kitchen table, and opened it. Emily's handwriting curved smoothly over the page. Lucas, I know I have no right to ask for your understanding, but I wanted you to know I regret what happened. Ryan turned out to be nothing like I hoped. I've struggled every day since I left. I don't expect forgiveness or sympathy. I just wanted you to know I realize how much I ruined. I took our dreams and shattered them. I'm sorry. She didn't beg to come back. She didn't ask for money. She just expressed regret. Lucas read the letter twice, searching for any sign of manipulation. It felt genuine, like a person who had finally seen the truth after chasing illusions. He placed the letter in a drawer, careful and slow. He felt no rush of anger, just a quiet acceptance that the past was what it was. Perhaps in time, he could find forgiveness, but he owed her nothing more than that. He stepped outside, letting the sunlight warm his face. Life continued to unfurl around him, the vineyard, the neighbors, the possibilities for growth. Emily's letter was just another piece of the puzzle, a reminder that everyone carried burdens and mistakes. As dusk settled over the hills, Lucas stood by the vines, listening to the distant hum of crickets. He knew there was still much to learn, and many hurdles awaited him, but he also knew he'd come a long way from the broken man who watched his wife leave with another. Here, in Sonoma, he was rebuilding a life of his own design. Slowly, patiently, he would shape something honest and resilient, something that might, in time, bring forth both wine and healing from the same rich soil. Emily Caldwell, she'd begun using Ryan's last name, at least in her head, as if it would make their new life feel more permanent, stood by the window of their small apartment, staring down at a stretch of cracked pavement and a half-empty parking lot. It was late morning, and Ryan had slipped out before dawn, leaving behind only the faint smell of his cologne and a quick text. Be back later. Don't wait up. He hadn't explained where he was going or why he needed the car all day. Emily pressed her forehead to the glass, feeling the coolness against her skin. This wasn't what she imagined when she'd left Lucas. She'd pictured a life with Ryan full of excitement, late-night dinners at intimate restaurants, spontaneous weekend getaways, laughter in bed until noon. Instead, she found herself sipping lukewarm coffee alone in a cramped one-bedroom unit in a less-than-charming neighborhood on the outskirts of town. The view from the window was all strip malls, gas stations, and a tired-looking laundromat. Hardly the romantic escape she'd envisioned. The heater rattled and hummed, struggling to keep the apartment warm. Emily turned away from the window and surveyed the living room. Suitcases stacked in the corner, unopened boxes that she'd hastily packed when she fled Lucas's home. She hadn't bothered to unpack because Ryan kept promising they'd move into a nicer place soon. He said he was working on a big business deal, just needed a little more cash up front. He asked her for a share of the savings she'd taken from Lucas, and she'd given it willingly, certain it would pay off in the long run. That had been weeks ago, and so far nothing had changed except the dwindling state of her bank account. Emily's phone buzzed. She picked it up, hoping it was Ryan. Instead, it was a text from Caroline. "Hey, haven't seen you at the gallery. How's it going?" Emily frowned, thumbs hovering over the screen. She didn't know how to respond. Caroline was the one who had introduced her to Ryan at that art event. Back then, Caroline had laughed and teased Emily about taking a bite of forbidden fruit. Now, Emily wondered if Caroline had known more about Ryan's nature than she let on. "Things are okay," Emily typed back, her message stark and unconvincing even to herself. Caroline responded with a winking emoji and a short, "We should grab a drink soon." Emily didn't reply. She wasn't sure she wanted Caroline's company right now. Caroline reminded her too much of the path she had chosen. With a sigh, Emily scrolled through job listings on her phone. Ryan kept telling her not to worry about money, that he'd handle it once his deal came through. But the rent was due in 2 weeks, and Emily wasn't certain how they'd pay it. The initial rush of freedom she'd felt when leaving Lucas had long faded. Now she felt uneasy, trapped in a smaller, less comfortable cage. Unable to concentrate, she headed to the kitchen. The fridge held a carton of almond milk, some wilted spinach, and half a loaf of cheap bread. No sign of the fancy cheeses or organic produce she and Lucas used to buy. She grimaced, slathered peanut butter on a slice of bread, and ate it standing up, lost in thought. By mid-afternoon, she couldn't stand the silence. She pulled on a coat, an old one she'd brought with her, and decided to walk to the nearby art gallery. It wasn't the same gallery where she'd pretended to volunteer back when she was deceiving Lucas. That had been a lie. But there was a small gallery a few blocks away that advertised for part-time staff. The pay was low, but it was something. At this point, she needed to feel useful, needed a bit of cash in her own account. The neighborhood's main street was lined with discount stores and run-down diners. She passed a pawn shop with neon signs flickering, "Open 24/7", and a convenience store where a bored teenager stared at his phone behind the counter. The gallery, if it could be called that, was tucked between a nail salon and a thrift store. A cardboard sign in the window read, "Help wanted. Part-time. Inquire within." Inside, dim lights cast shadows on a meager display of local artists' paintings. A short woman with cropped gray hair looked up from behind a desk as Emily entered. "Help you?" she asked, voice tinged with boredom. "Hi," Emily said, smoothing her hair. "I saw the sign. You're looking for help?" The woman eyed her. "Yeah, we need someone a couple afternoons a week, mainly to keep the place neat, greet visitors, handle small sales." Emily forced a smile. "I have some experience with galleries," she lied, thinking of the few art events she attended with Caroline. "I'm dependable and I can start immediately." The woman shrugged. "Name's Darlene. Minimum wage, no benefits. Interested?" It wasn't the glamorous, curatorial work Emily once dreamed of, but she nodded. "Yes, I am." Darlene slid a small stack of paperwork over the desk. "Fill these out. We pay by check every 2 weeks. No promises about long-term hours. Tourist season's months away, so it's pretty quiet." Emily thanked her and set to work with a pen, feeling the sting of humiliation. A few months ago, she'd never imagined she'd be scrambling for a minimum wage job. She'd had a stable life, financial security, a husband who, though distant at times, was reliable. Now, she was here, forging a new identity as a woman just trying to get by. As she handed the forms back, Darlene pursed her lips. "You start tomorrow at noon. Dress casual but neat. We mostly sell small prints and postcards to walk-ins. Nothing fancy." Emily nodded, forcing another smile. "Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity." Outside, she took a shaky breath. She had a job, at least. It might help her keep some sense of independence. Maybe Ryan would applaud her initiative. But when she returned to the apartment, Ryan still wasn't back. Evening settled in. She texted him. "Hey, got a job at that gallery I mentioned? Let's celebrate?" No reply. By the time he stumbled in after midnight, she was half asleep on the couch. He smelled of whiskey and cigarettes, a scent that made her stomach clench. "Where were you?" Emily asked softly, trying not to sound accusatory. "Out," Ryan mumbled, dropping his jacket over a chair. He looked annoyed by the question. "Had some meetings, okay?" Emily swallowed. "I got a part-time job at a gallery. I figured it'll help until your deal comes through." Ryan rolled his eyes. "I told you, you don't need to do that. Everything's under control." She wanted to believe him. "Ryan, we have rent due soon. We can't just rely on what's left of my savings." He snorted. "Didn't you say you had a nice chunk from your old life with Lucas? What, already running dry?" Emily's cheeks burned. "We've spent most of it. You said you needed capital, remember?" Ryan glared. "Stop nagging. Things take time. Don't act like some desperate housewife. You wanted excitement? This is it. Be patient." He kicked off his shoes and headed to the bathroom, leaving Emily speechless in the living room. The tone he used, disdainful, dismissive, shocked her. This wasn't the charming man who'd held her hand and whispered flattery at that first art show. This was someone else entirely. In the following days, Emily settled into a grim routine. She worked afternoons at the gallery, dusting frames and reorganizing prints that no one seemed interested in buying. Darlene barely spoke beyond giving instructions. The foot traffic was sparse, and Emily's main task became flipping through old art catalogs to pass the time. She made small talk with a few customers, mostly locals, killing time before appointments, but no one lingered long. On her breaks, she'd text Ryan, receiving curt responses or none at all. He always claimed to be busy with business. Once, when she pressed him for details, he snapped, "You wouldn't understand," and refused to elaborate. At home, their arguments escalated. Emily confronted him about the money. "We need a plan," she insisted, voice trembling with a mixture of anger and fear. "I left everything behind for us, and now I'm basically living off scraps. You said you had connections. You said you had a vision." Ryan scoffed, eyes narrowed. "Oh, spare me the lecture. You're the one who left your cushy life, not me. Don't blame me if you can't handle a little uncertainty." Uncertainty. That word felt like an insult. She'd traded a known world, albeit flawed, for a fantasy that was unraveling fast. Emily's heart sank. She realized she knew almost nothing about Ryan's background. He never introduced her to friends or family. He claimed to have big plans, but never shared specifics. Caroline's voice echoed in her head. "He's so charming, Em. He'll show you a whole new world." Had Caroline known this new world would be so hollow? One afternoon, after a particularly slow day at the gallery, Emily tried calling Caroline. It rang several times before going to voicemail. She tried again later, and this time Caroline picked up. "Emily, hi! Been a while!" Caroline sounded cheerful, maybe too cheerful. "Caroline, I need to talk," Emily said, stepping outside the gallery door onto the sidewalk. The traffic whooshed by, a backdrop to her mounting frustration. "Listen, Ryan's not who I thought he was. He's distant, secretive. I'm barely scraping by." Caroline laughed nervously. "Oh, sweetie, I told you Ryan was a thrill seeker. Maybe you just need to relax and let him lead. Men like him are restless, you know?" Emily clenched her jaw. "This isn't about thrill seeking. He's taking my money and giving nothing back. I'm worried he's a con." Caroline fell silent for a beat, then sighed. "Look, Em, Ryan's always been a wanderer. I introduced him to a few friends before you, and it never lasted. I thought maybe you'd be different. I'm sorry if it's not working out." Emily's stomach dropped. "Wait, what do you mean? You knew he had a history of this?" Caroline's voice turned defensive. "I never said he scammed anyone, just that he doesn't stick around. I thought you understood what you were getting into. You wanted excitement, remember?" Emily's vision blurred with tears. She felt betrayed a second time, first by Ryan, and now by Caroline's cavalier attitude. "You said he was a catch. You never warned me about this." Caroline sighed again, exasperated. "Emily, you're a grown woman. I introduced you two at a party. It's not my job to play matchmaker. You made your choices." Before Emily could respond, Caroline hung up. Emily stared at her phone, heart pounding. She realized she'd been naive. Caroline was never truly a friend. She was just someone who enjoyed chaos, who delighted in pushing others towards temptation. Emily had fallen right into it. As the weeks passed, tension at home escalated. Ryan returned later and later, sometimes not at all. Emily confronted him one night, voice shaking. "Where do you go? Who are you seeing?" He leaned against the kitchen counter, arms crossed. "You don't get to interrogate me," he hissed, eyes flashing with anger. "You're lucky I'm still here. I could walk out right now and leave you with nothing." Emily swallowed. She realized he was right in a way. She had no leverage. She'd abandoned her marriage, burned bridges, given him most of her money. He had her cornered. Fear pulsed under her skin. "Ryan, please," she said, trying a different tactic. "I just want us to be stable. We can't live like this." He rolled his eyes. "Stable is boring. If you wanted stable, you should have stayed with old man Lucas." The mention of Lucas stung. She pictured Lucas reliable, stable Lucas, who might now be finding new meaning without her. She'd never meant to hurt him so deeply, but she had. And for what? For this man who mocked her desperation. That night, Emily slept fitfully. She woke at dawn to find Ryan gone again. On the table was a handwritten note. "Need more cash. Make it happen. No explanation, no apology, just an order." Emily crumpled the note in her fist. She had no more money to give him. She'd been squirreling away her tiny paychecks from the gallery, but it barely covered groceries. She thought of calling Lucas for help, but dismissed the idea immediately. She'd severed that bond. He owed her nothing. She pictured Mia and Jacob's faces if they knew what she'd done to herself. Shame consumed her. By the end of the month, Emily's finances were dire. The rent was overdue and Ryan was nowhere to be found. She tried calling him, texting him. No response. She found herself alone in the apartment, pacing like a trapped animal. Finally, late one afternoon, the landlord knocked. He was a stocky man in his 50s named Mr. Delgado, who wore a tired expression that suggested he'd seen too many tenants come and go. "Rent's late," he said, not unkindly but firmly. Emily bit her lip. "I'm sorry. My partner's been out." Mr. Delgado raised a hand, cutting her off gently. "Look, I get it. Times are tough. But I need payment by Friday or I'll have to start eviction proceedings. Nothing personal." She nodded, tears prickling at her eyes. "I understand," she whispered, voice hoarse. When he left, Emily sank onto the couch, pressing her face into her hands. Where was Ryan? He'd abandoned her, just as Caroline hinted he would. She should have seen this coming. She'd chosen to believe his lies because they offered her a fantasy of excitement and freedom. Now all she had was despair. With trembling fingers, Emily looked up local temp jobs on her phone. She'd have to take another job on top of the gallery. Maybe waitress at that diner down the street, the one with peeling paint and chipped mugs. Anything to keep a roof over her head. That evening, as she prepared a dinner of instant noodles, she heard footsteps outside the door. Ryan burst in, reeking of alcohol, his hair disheveled. Emily's relief at seeing him turned to fury. "Where have you been?" she demanded, voice choked with emotion. "The rent is overdue. I've been worried sick." Ryan laughed, a cruel sound. "Rent? That's your problem now. I'm done playing house." He grabbed a duffel bag from the closet and started shoving clothes into it. Panic seized her. "What are you doing? You can't just leave." He turned on her, eyes cold. "Watch me. There's nothing left for me here. You're out of money, and I'm not sticking around to play broke boyfriend." He slung the bag over his shoulder. "You were just a means to an end, sweetheart." Tears streamed down her face. "How can you do this?" He shrugged. "Easy. You fell for it. And now I'm moving on. Caroline's got friends, you know. Plenty of other women looking for a thrill." Emily's voice cracked. "Please, I believed in you. I gave up everything." Ryan smirked. "That's on you." With that, he walked out, slamming the door behind him. Emily stood there, the silence of the apartment ringing in her ears. She slid down the wall, sobbing into her knees. She had never felt so worthless, so hollow. She had traded love and stability for a mirage, and now it had vanished, leaving her destitute and alone. The next morning, Emily forced herself out of bed. She had to go to work at the gallery, her one lifeline. She dressed in the same worn sweater, tried to smooth her hair, and walked the familiar route. The sunlight felt harsh, exposing her failure to the world. At the gallery, Darlene glanced up as Emily entered. "You're late," she said flatly. "I'm sorry," Emily mumbled, voice raw. She stepped behind the desk. staring at the dull paintings she'd seen 100 times. Only a handful of customers trickled in. A middle-aged couple looking for a cheap souvenir, a student who browsed and left empty-handed. Emily went through the motions, head spinning with panic over the rent. She might have to pawn her jewelry, what little she had left. The earrings Lucas found in her purse, the ones that started this entire nightmare, were long gone. She sold them weeks ago to cover groceries. At lunch break, Emily bought a coffee from a cart on the corner and sat on a bench watching cars pass. She tried to piece together what to do next. Maybe call Mia or Jacob, beg for forgiveness, for help. But how could she face them after what she did to their father? As she sipped her coffee, something caught her eye. Across the street, Caroline stood chatting with a woman Emily didn't recognize, tall, stylish, clearly intrigued by whatever Caroline was saying. Emily felt sick. Caroline was probably grooming another victim for Ryan. Anger sparked. Not a productive anger, but a helpless, sad fury. She couldn't save the next person from making her mistake, but maybe she could warn Caroline. She stood, walked across the street, and approached them. Caroline's eyes widened. "Emily, hi. This is my friend Lena." Caroline's tone was cautious, as if sensing a storm coming. Emily ignored Lena, focusing on Caroline. Her voice came out steady but low. "Ryan's gone. He took my money and left." Caroline shrugged, a faux polite smile on her lips. "I'm sorry to hear that." Emily wanted to scream at her, to call her out, but what good would that do now? Lena looked uncomfortable, glancing between them. Emily just shook her head. "I hope you sleep well at night, Caroline." Then she turned and walked away, leaving Caroline and Lena standing awkwardly on the sidewalk. Back at the gallery, Emily's shift crawled by. When she finally returned to the apartment, she found an eviction notice taped to the door, a reminder that time was running out. That night, Emily curled up on the floor, hugging herself against the chill. She had lost everything: her marriage, her savings, and the illusion of love Ryan offered. All that remained was regret and the harsh reality she'd chosen. She thought about Lucas, the stability and kindness she'd once taken for granted. She recalled his gentle smile, the way he tried to understand her even when she pushed him away. Tears dried on her cheeks. She knew she couldn't undo what she had done. She also knew she had to survive somehow. She'd find a cheaper place, maybe rent a single room somewhere. She'd keep working. She'd learn from this pain, as terrible as it was. In the darkness, she whispered a quiet apology to Lucas, even though he couldn't hear. She apologized to herself, too. She vowed that if she ever got the chance, she'd acknowledge the damage she'd caused and seek some form of redemption. There was no going back to what she had before, but maybe if life allowed, she could find some small measure of peace. For now, all she had were 4 fading walls, an overdue bill, and a heavy heart. But at least she saw the truth clearly. Ryan's charm was a poison. Caroline's fun-loving persona was a mask. Emily would have to stand on her own 2 feet, face the consequences head-on. The slow-motion collapse of her illusions had ended, and she stood amid the wreckage, determined to make it through the night. Lucas Reed woke early one morning to the soft hum of a distant tractor and the gentle rustle of leaves outside his bedroom window. He'd been in Sonoma long enough now that he recognized the rhythms of the land. The farmhouse felt more like home with each passing day. He moved quietly through the kitchen, switching on the coffee maker and listening to it sputter to life. A small vase of wildflowers picked from the edge of the vineyard stood on the table, adding a splash of color. As he sipped his first cup of coffee, his phone buzzed. Mia's name lit up the screen. He answered, leaning against the kitchen counter. "Morning, Dad," Mia said, her voice bright despite the early hour. "Just wanted to confirm my visit next week. I'll bring some preliminary designs for the solar panels and water system. Jacob's excited to show you some drone prototypes he's been tinkering with." Lucas smiled. "Sounds great. I can't wait to see what you both have planned." They chatted briefly about logistics, then hung up. Lucas set the phone down and stepped outside onto the porch, breathing in the scent of damp earth. The sky was a pale blue, the sun just beginning to warm the rolling hills. He wondered what this day would bring. He had heard about a local wine tasting event, one of many in Sonoma's active community, happening that afternoon at the Porter family vineyards, just a few miles up the road. Oscar mentioned it casually the other day, saying it might be a good chance for Lucas to meet more neighbors and learn about the region's varietals. Lucas wasn't exactly a social butterfly these days, but curiosity nudged him. Maybe he'd learn something that could help his own vineyard thrive. By midday, Lucas had finished his morning tasks. He'd walked the rows with Oscar, checking the vine health. He'd met with Beth, the contractor, about starting on the eco-friendly installations Mia suggested. Now, driving a short distance along a scenic route, he found himself turning down a gravel driveway marked by a tasteful wooden sign, Porter Family Vineyards Wine Tasting Today. He parked in a small lot where a few other cars were scattered. From a distance, he saw a gathering of people under a large oak tree behind a charming renovated barn. Tables draped in white cloths held bottles of wine and small plates of bread and cheese. As he approached, Lucas noticed a woman with auburn hair pulled into a loose bun, giving instructions to a younger man who arranged glasses. She wore a simple linen dress and boots, a pair of sunglasses resting on top of her head. When she turned and caught sight of him, she offered a tentative smile. "Hi there," she said, walking over. "Welcome to Porter Family Vineyards. I'm Grace Porter. Let me know if you have any questions." "Nice to meet you," Lucas said, extending a hand. "I'm Lucas Reed. I'm new around here, just bought a vineyard property a few miles south." Grace shook his hand. Her grip was confident. "Oh, you must be the one Oscar mentioned. Word travels fast in these parts. I've heard you've taken on a bit of a project." Lucas smiled wryly. "That's one way to put it. Still getting my bearings, honestly." Grace nodded, glancing around at the guests milling about. "I get it. When I first started running this place on my own, I felt like I was trying to read a map in a foreign language. You just have to let the land teach you." Her words reminded him of Oscar's advice. "So this is your family's vineyard?" She took a moment before answering. "It was my ex-husband's family vineyard," she said quietly, "but I ended up with it after the divorce. Long story. Now I'm trying to restore its reputation and do things my own way." Lucas picked up on the hint of pain in her voice. He knew what betrayal and loss felt like. "Well, from what I see, you're doing a great job," he said gently, gesturing to the neat rows of vines and the cheerful event. Grace offered a small smile. "Thanks. Today's tasting is a chance to introduce locals to our new blends. Nothing too fancy, but I'm hoping for some good feedback." Lucas noticed someone beckoning Grace from behind a table. "Go ahead, I won't keep you," he said, stepping back. "Try the Cabernet," Grace suggested before walking off. "I'd love to hear what you think." Alone now, Lucas wandered to the tasting table. The young man Grace was instructing earlier, Ethan, according to his name tag, poured him a small glass. The Cabernet tasted rich, with notes of blackberry and a subtle oak finish. Lucas didn't consider himself a wine connoisseur, but he knew enough to appreciate quality. This was good wine, carefully crafted, balanced, a result of someone's hard work and vision. He mingled quietly, picking up snippets of conversation. Many guests were locals, a middle-aged couple debating the merits of organic fertilizers, a group of friends marveling at the vineyard's new irrigation system, a local shop owner joking about trying to get Grace to sell him her wines at a discount. Lucas recognized some faces from the sustainable farming workshop he'd attended. It felt comforting to be part of a community that cared about the land. After a while, Grace returned, this time holding 2 glasses. She handed one to Lucas, keeping the other for herself. "This is our new rose," she said, raising her glass. "Care to taste?" Lucas took a sip. The rose was crisp, with a hint of strawberry. "I like it. Feels like something you'd sip on a warm afternoon watching the sun go down." Grace's eyes met his, a spark of understanding passing between them. "That's exactly what I was going for. Something honest, easy, but not dull." They drifted away from the crowd, strolling along a row of vines. Grace explained that she'd taken a risk planting a few varietals not traditionally grown in this region, hoping to differentiate her winery. Lucas admired her courage. It reminded him that reinvention was possible, that a person could pivot even after heartbreak and disappointment. Eventually, they found themselves standing near the edge of the property, where the land sloped gently. From this vantage, Lucas could see the distant hills, the patchwork of vineyards that gave Sonoma its character. "I heard you're rethinking your vineyard, maybe adding some sustainable features," Grace asked, leaning against a wooden fence post. Lucas nodded, surprised she knew. "Word does travel fast. Yes, my daughter Mia is an architect and wants to integrate solar panels, rainwater collection, that sort of thing. My son Jacob's an engineer and has ideas about using drones to monitor vine health." Grace's eyebrows rose. "Drones, huh? That's quite modern. Must be nice to have your kids involved." Lucas's gaze lowered slightly. He thought of Emily, of the life he'd once pictured, the two of them retiring and enjoying quiet days somewhere picturesque. Instead, he was here alone, starting over. "They've been a source of strength," he said, voice soft. "I think we're all finding new ways to connect after some hard times." Grace studied him for a moment. "I get that. My ex Kevin ran this place before I took over. I trusted him, even built my life around his vision. Turned out I didn't have a say in much. He found comfort elsewhere. Let's put it that way. By the time I realized it, the vineyard was slipping through my fingers." She sighed, pushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Taking it back and starting from scratch was my way of saying, I matter too." Lucas felt a mix of empathy and admiration. He understood the hollow feeling left by a spouse's betrayal. He knew what it was like to pick up pieces that once fit neatly into a life you thought you knew. "I'm sorry you went through that," he said simply. "But you're doing something good here. This place feels alive." Grace's eyes flickered with gratitude. "Thanks, I needed to hear that." She paused, then added, "I'm hosting a small dinner next weekend, just a few local growers and some friends. We'll talk shop, taste each other's wines, and share advice. You should come." Lucas hesitated. He hadn't gone to many social gatherings since Emily left, but something about Grace's invitation felt genuine and welcoming. "I'd like that," he said. "Count me in." They strolled back toward the tasting area. The crowd had thinned, a sign that the event was winding down. Grace excused herself to bid farewell to the last guests, while Lucas stepped aside and watched her interact with people. She was warm and attentive, listening closely, making everyone feel valued. It was a skill Lucas recognized he'd honed something similar in business, though now he preferred authenticity over corporate charm. When the guests were gone, Lucas lingered a moment longer, not wanting to leave too abruptly. Grace approached him again, this time holding a small bottle wrapped in tissue paper. "For you," she said, pressing it into his hands. "A thank you for coming." He glanced down. "You didn't have to?" "I know," she said, smiling, "but I want you to have it. It's the first batch of the Cabernet we tasted, bottled earlier this year. Consider it a welcome to the neighborhood." Lucas felt a warmth in his chest. "Thank you, Grace. That means a lot." They parted with an unspoken understanding. They were two people forging new paths, scarred by betrayal but not defined by it. There was no rush, just a gentle sense of possibility in the slow, quiet Sonoma air. Over the following days, Lucas returned to his vineyard with renewed purpose. He and Oscar worked side by side, examining vine health, planning future plantings. Lucas told Oscar about Grace, and Oscar nodded approvingly, as if he'd known all along that their meeting would be significant. "You two have similar stories," Oscar said one afternoon while they repaired a trellis. "Loss and growth often go hand in hand. Vines know it, people know it if they pay attention." Lucas wiped sweat from his brow. "I just met her, but I respect what she's doing. She's honest. You can taste it in her wines." Oscar grinned. "Honesty in wine, now that's something to celebrate." Meanwhile, Mia and Jacob called, excited about their upcoming visit. Mia emailed him preliminary sketches, a layout for solar panels on the farmhouse roof, a system for collecting rainwater in a small pond that could double as a scenic feature. Jacob texted photos of drones he'd been tinkering with, tiny quadcopters fitted with cameras and sensors. Lucas also made a point of learning more about the local community. He visited Bill and Karen next door to buy fresh herbs and ended up chatting for an hour under their pergola. He bumped into Marisol, the lavender farmer he'd met at the sustainability workshop, and she recommended a local carpenter who could build custom benches for the tasting area he planned to set up at his own vineyard someday. In quiet moments, Lucas thought about Emily, wondered if she ever regretted her choice. He didn't dwell on it as much anymore. A letter had arrived from her not long ago, expressing gratitude for his forgiveness and the chance he gave her to survive financially. He placed it in a drawer, deciding that chapter was closed. The bitterness had faded, replaced by a calm acceptance. Life had moved on, and so had he. On the day of Grace's dinner gathering, Lucas dressed simply, a crisp shirt, jeans, and boots. He considered bringing the bottle Grace gave him, but decided instead to pick up a small bouquet of wildflowers Oscar had mentioned a local flower farm nearby. He arrived at dusk, the sky streaked with oranges and purples, the Porter vineyard glowing in the golden hour light. A small group mingled near a long wooden table set under string lights. Lucas recognized some faces from the tasting event. Grace approached, beaming when she saw the flowers. "These are lovely. Thank you, Lucas." She passed them to a young assistant who placed them in a vase at the center of the table. Over dinner, they tasted various wines, a crisp Sauvignon Blanc, a bold Syrah, and shared stories. A man named Andre, who managed a nearby winery, spoke about climate challenges and the importance of water conservation. A woman named Teresa, who ran a small cheese-making operation, offered samples of her latest goat cheese. The conversations drifted from soil quality to marketing strategies, from personal anecdotes to philosophical musings about nature's resilience. Lucas found himself seated beside Grace. Between sips of wine and bites of roasted vegetables, they talked quietly, sometimes drifting out of the larger group chat to focus on each other. He asked her about her divorce, carefully, not wanting to pry. She shrugged lightly, acknowledging the pain but not letting it define her. "I lost trust," she said, "but I gained freedom. Sometimes freedom comes at a high price, but it's still freedom." Lucas understood. He felt the same about leaving his old life behind, selling the company, and starting fresh. He mentioned Emily without bitterness, explaining that he'd learned anger only weighed him down. Grace reached out and briefly touched his hand, a silent gesture of solidarity. As the night deepened, Sophia, Grace's teenage daughter, emerged from the farmhouse, balancing a tray of homemade cookies. Lucas smiled. He remembered from the outline that Grace had a daughter. Sophia had Grace's auburn hair and an easy confidence that belied her age. "You must be Lucas," Sophia said, setting the tray down. "Mom mentioned a new neighbor. Hi, I'm Sophia." Lucas greeted her warmly. "Nice to meet you. Your mom's been kind enough to introduce me to the local scene." Sophia glanced at Grace, then back at Lucas. "If Mom likes you, you must be okay," she teased. "She has good instincts." Grace rolled her eyes affectionately, but Lucas saw pride in her gaze. The three of them talked for a bit. Sophia confided she loved reading sci-fi novels and was helping design some labels for the winery's new line. Lucas mentioned Jacob's interest in robotics, and Sophia's eyes lit up. "Drones? That's so cool," she said, intrigued by the intersection of technology and agriculture. Eventually, the party wound down, guests saying their goodbyes and heading off into the night. Lucas helped Grace and Sophia clear plates and glasses. As Sophia headed inside to load the dishwasher, Grace and Lucas lingered under the string lights, their voices low. "Thank you for inviting me," Lucas said. He felt more at ease than he had in a long time, as if he'd found a corner of the world where he truly belonged. Grace tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I'm glad you came. You bring a calm presence. This place needs more people who respect the land and each other." Lucas looked at her, the quiet strength in her eyes, the way she held herself. He saw a future here, a future that didn't erase his past but built upon it, turning pain into wisdom. "I'm still learning," he said, "but I want to do something meaningful, not just make wine, but build a legacy my children can be proud of." Grace nodded thoughtfully. "I feel the same. My daughter's at a critical age. I want her to know that even when life blindsides you, you can stand back up, find new purpose." They fell silent, the sound of crickets and distant frogs filling the gaps. Lucas studied the shapes the shadows made on the ground. "How would you feel about collaborating?" he asked finally. "Maybe we can experiment with a joint venture. Some of my land for your experimental varietals, and in return, your expertise guiding me through my first few harvests." Grace tilted her head, considering. "That's a big step," she said, voice thoughtful. "But I like the idea of combining strengths. It might be a way to create something unique." Lucas felt a hopeful flutter. "We could start small. See how it goes." Grace smiled. "Small steps are good. Let's talk more about it. Mia and Jacob's ideas, your willingness to innovate, and my experience here, we could blend it all into something special." They said their goodnights, and Lucas drove home under a starlit sky. He thought about the slow-motion unraveling of his old life, how each painful moment had led him here, to this quiet road and these gentle hills. Meeting Grace had given him more than just a potential business partner. It gave him a sense that happiness could still bloom in unexpected places. In the days that followed, Lucas worked with renewed focus. He emailed Mia about potential collaborations with Grace, and Mia replied enthusiastically, offering to draw up some conceptual plans for joint tasting areas or shared storage facilities. Jacob sent him a video of a prototype drone flying over a small test field, mapping out conditions with startling detail. Lucas also visited a local agricultural supply store to scout materials for building a small greenhouse. The clerk, a man named Ronnie, gave him tips on which irrigation systems worked best in the region. On the way out, Lucas ran into Teresa, the cheesemaker from Grace's dinner. She was picking up supplies and invited Lucas to swing by her creamery sometime. The sense of community was growing. He felt connections forming like strong roots beneath the soil. One afternoon, while walking his vineyard, Lucas paused to admire the slow progress of the vines. He thought about Emily again, but this time without the sharp sting. He hoped she was finding her own form of stability wherever she was. He'd heard through Mia that Emily had reached out, expressing gratitude. He chose not to respond further. Silence was sometimes kinder than reopening old wounds. He'd done his part by forgiving her, and that forgiveness freed him to move forward. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Lucas pulled the bottle Grace had given him from a cabinet. He opened it carefully, pouring a glass of the Cabernet, and stepped onto his porch. Savoring the rich aroma, he took a slow sip. He could taste the story in the wine, the labor, the patience, the risks taken. He imagined Grace's careful attention, her determination after betrayal. This vineyard, these vines like people could be hurt, pruned, nearly destroyed, and still they reached for the sun, producing something valuable and true. He realized he wasn't just building a business here, he was building a life. With Grace's friendship, Mia and Jacob's support, Oscar's guidance, and a community that welcomed him, Lucas Reed was finding purpose he never expected. The revenge he'd once considered exposing Ryan would happen in its own time through his network. He needn't obsess. Life had a way of balancing scales. As he finished his glass, the twilight deepened. A gentle breeze carried the scent of soil and distant lavender fields. Lucas imagined a future harvest, shared ventures, family dinners at long wooden tables under string lights, and laughter echoing through the vines. Here in Sonoma, he and Grace were charting new territories, blending their past hurts into something that could, over time, yield a rich, full-bodied redemption. Lucas Reed stood on the edge of his vineyard in Sonoma, leaning against a wooden fence post, the late afternoon sun stretching his shadow across the rows of vines. The air smelled of warm earth and distant lavender. It had been a good day. Mia and Jacob's latest visit ended with promising plans for solar panel installation and drone-based vineyard monitoring. Grace had stopped by briefly in the morning to share a basket of fresh peaches, and they'd talked about the joint venture they were considering, a small blended batch of wine that would combine Grace's unique varietals with Lucas's land and resources. Life, once shattered, was coalescing into something richer. He would have stood there longer, enjoying the quiet, had his phone not buzzed in his pocket. Pulling it out, he saw Mia's name flashing. He answered, voice calm. "Hey, Mia." "Dad," Mia said softly, as if wary about disturbing some fragile peace. I wanted you to know that I ran into Mom today." Lucas's grip on the phone tightened. He hadn't seen Emily since the day she left with Ryan. He hadn't tried to contact her after their brief, impersonal communications via letter. He was healing, forging new paths, and her presence had receded into distant memory. Yet his daughter's voice brought it all rushing back. "Where?" he asked, trying to keep his tone even. At a small cafe near her apartment, I was meeting a friend from work. I spotted her sitting alone by the window. Mia hesitated. Dad, she looked not good. Tired. Thinner than before. She seemed surprised to see me, almost ashamed. Lucas exhaled slowly, looking down at his boots. He wanted to feel nothing, to remain detached. But a quiet sympathy stirred in his chest. Did you talk to her? A little. She didn't say much about her situation, but I could tell she's struggling. She asked how you and Jacob are. I think she was too proud to ask directly for help, but it was in her eyes. Lucas closed his eyes. He pictured Emily, the once confident and elegant woman, now alone in some cramped apartment, regret heavy in her stare. He'd known she was hurting, he'd heard bits and pieces through mutual acquaintances, but he hadn't let himself dwell on it. Now Mia's words made it real. Thanks for telling me, he said softly. I'll think about what to do. Mia's voice lowered compassionately. I'm not saying you have to do anything, Dad. Just I know you've moved on, and we're proud of you. I just didn't want to keep this from you. Appreciate that, Mia, Lucas managed. I'll talk to you soon, okay? They said their goodbyes, and Lucas tucked the phone away. He lingered there, looking at the vines swaying gently in the breeze. So much of his life now was about growth and renewal, about taking broken pieces and shaping them into something meaningful. Perhaps it was time to confront the last loose end, Emily's lingering pain. That evening, Lucas sat at his farmhouse table, a simple dinner before him, a grilled chicken breast, some vegetables from Bill and Karen's farm, and a glass of Grace's rose. He ate slowly, his mind drifting. He'd forgiven Emily in his heart long ago, accepting that she was human and fallible. He held no desire for revenge anymore. The exposure of Ryan had been enough to ensure he wouldn't hurt others easily. Lucas had chosen to let anger go because it cost too much energy. But there remained a quiet tension. He had never spoken to Emily after the fact, never truly acknowledged the pain they both endured face to face. The thought of seeing her unsettled him, but maybe it was necessary. He could afford compassion now, secure in who he was becoming. As he mulled this over, Oscar appeared at the back door. The old caretaker often checked in after finishing his tasks. Lucas waved him in. Evening, Oscar. Evening, Oscar said, voice low and steady. He noticed Lucas's pensive expression and raised an eyebrow. Something on your mind? Lucas hesitated. Oscar had become a confidant, a quiet presence that never judged. I just heard from Mia that Emily's not doing well, he said, stirring his fork idly. I haven't seen her since she left. Oscar nodded slowly, folding his arms. You thinking about meeting her? Lucas sighed. I am. We have unfinished business, I suppose. Not about getting back together, God, no, but about closure. I've moved on. Found a purpose here, but maybe facing her would put the last of the ghost to rest. Oscar rubbed his chin. Closure's important. Just be sure you know what you want from that conversation. He paused. Anger and resentment are heavy loads. You've set them down. Don't pick them up again. Lucas managed a small smile. Don't worry. I'm not going to blame or accuse. Maybe we both need to acknowledge the damage and walk away clean. Oscar nodded. Then go see her. Speak your truth calmly. The old man left Lucas to his thoughts. The decision felt made now. He'd talk to Emily, face to face. And then he'd return to Sonoma's quiet embrace, leaving the pain behind for good. The next morning, Lucas rose early and took his pickup truck back to the city. The familiar roads passed by, highways, suburban neighborhoods, and finally the stretch of urban landscape that once was home. He remembered their old house in a nice neighborhood, with flower beds Emily loved to tend. He didn't drive past it. He wanted no nostalgia, just a direct path to the present. Mia had texted him Emily's approximate address a few months back, from when she'd picked up some mail Emily requested. It was a modest apartment complex in a transitional area safe enough, but far from the comfort Emily had known. Parking his truck, Lucas took a moment to steady himself. He wore simple clothes jeans, a blue button-down shirt, and carried no gifts or tokens. This wasn't a reunion, just a conversation. He climbed the stairs to the second floor. The hallway smelled faintly of cooking oil and cheap air freshener. He found her door number 10B and paused. Voices drifted from a TV inside. He raised his hand and knocked softly. A moment passed, then the TV muted. He heard footsteps and the click of the door chain. The door opened a crack, and there she was, Emily, eyes widening at the sight of him. She looked older, somehow lines of worry etched around her mouth, hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, wearing a plain sweater and jeans. No makeup, no polished veneer. "Lucas," she said, voice barely above a whisper. She stepped back, opened the door wider. I didn't expect to see you." Lucas offered a tentative nod. "Hello, Emily. May I come in?" She hesitated, glancing over her shoulder as if checking whether the room was tidy enough. Then she stepped aside. Sure. The apartment was small, a living room that flowed into a kitchenette, a single-bedroom door off to the side, sparse furniture, a second-hand couch, a flimsy coffee table, a thrift store lamp. The TV perched on a cheap stand. It struck Lucas how different this was from their old home with its curated decor, warm lighting, and polished floors. Emily muted the TV completely and turned to face him, arms folded protectively across her chest. "How did you find me?" she asked softly. "Mia mentioned she saw you. She was worried," Lucas said, careful to keep his tone gentle. "I've been thinking about us about the past. I thought it might be time we talked." Emily swallowed hard, looking at the floor. "I suppose I can't blame you. We never really had a proper goodbye, did we?" Lucas shook his head. "No, we didn't." They moved to the couch, sitting at opposite ends. The silence was thick, weighted with old memories and regrets. Lucas remembered their early days, their wedding, the first house they bought, Mia's birth, Jacob's first steps. All that history sat between them now like a fragile relic. "I know you're struggling," Lucas said after a moment. "You don't owe me details, but I want you to know I don't hate you. I'm past that." Emily's eyes filled with tears. She tried to blink away. "I never thought you'd come here, especially not with kindness." He looked at her, surprised by how frail she seemed. "Emily, what happened between us, it broke a lot of things. But I'm not here to dredge up blame. I've moved on. I have a new life, a vineyard, plans with Mia and Jacob, and someone else I care about." He paused, thinking of Grace. "I'm not looking to punish you." Emily pressed her lips together, hands clasped in her lap. "That's more than I deserve," she whispered. Her voice trembled. "I've thought a lot about what I did. At the time, I felt trapped, unhappy. I blamed you for my dissatisfaction, thinking running away would fix everything." She shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping. "It was a fantasy. Ryan was never going to give me happiness. I see that now." Lucas nodded. "I know you see it, but what's done is done. We lost our marriage, but we don't have to carry hatred forever." She looked up at him, tears slipping free now. "I'm sorry," she said, voice cracking. "I don't even know if that matters to you. But I am. I tore apart a life we built, and for what? Nothing. It cost me everything, my stability, my comfort, my pride." Lucas's chest tightened. He reached into his pocket for a tissue and handed it to her. "It matters," he said softly. "Not because I need your apology to move on, but because I think you need to say it. And I need to hear it. We were partners for a long time. We loved each other once. We raised amazing kids. Your apology honors that history." Emily dabbed at her eyes, nodding. "I never meant to hurt Mia and Jacob so deeply. They still talk to me, but I feel their disappointment. I know I broke trust that might never fully mend." Lucas understood. "They're adults now, and they love you, but they're hurt. It'll take time, and maybe things won't be what they were, but you can still be present in their lives in an honest way." Emily let out a shaky breath. "I've been surviving on part-time gallery work, renting this place month to month. Every time I feel sorry for myself, I remember that I chose this. I can't blame anyone else. Not anymore." Lucas studied her face. She'd changed, less polished, more raw, and maybe more authentic. Pain had stripped away her illusions. "You can still rebuild," he said gently. "It's never too late to find some measure of peace. You may not have the old comforts, but you have a chance to be honest with yourself now." She closed her eyes, as if savoring his words. "Do you forgive me?" she asked, voice barely audible. Lucas hesitated, not out of uncertainty, but out of the weight of what he was about to say. "Yes," he said finally. "I forgive you. But forgiveness doesn't mean going back. I've found a life without you that gives me peace and purpose. I want you to understand that I'm not offering a second chance at marriage, just closure." Emily opened her eyes, tears streaming silently. "I know," she said. "I wouldn't ask for that. I don't deserve it, and we've both changed too much. But thank you for your forgiveness. It means I can stop hating myself quite so much." Lucas reached out and briefly touched her hand, just a gentle squeeze. Then he let go. "You need to be kind to yourself, Emily. Learn from this. Don't let it define you." She took a trembling breath and nodded. "I'll try. Maybe I can find a better job or go back to school. Something to build a future that's mine. I won't waste the chance your forgiveness gives me." For a moment, they sat in quiet understanding. The small apartment seemed to hum with unspoken gratitude and sorrow. Lucas didn't regret coming here. He felt lighter, as if a lingering burden had slipped off his shoulders. He had Oscar's words in his mind, "Don't pick up old resentments." And he hadn't. He was leaving something behind here, not taking anything away. Rising to his feet, Lucas offered her a final, gentle smile. "I should go," he said. "I have a long drive back." Emily stood too, still holding the tissue. "Will I see you again?" Lucas tilted his head thoughtfully. "If life brings us together at family events, yes. Mia and Jacob might want us both present for future milestones. I'll be civil, even cordial, but I won't seek you out beyond that. We've said what we needed to say." Her shoulders sagged, but she accepted this truth. "I understand. Thank you for everything." He nodded, moving towards the door. Just before he stepped into the hallway, he looked back. The woman standing before him was no longer a betrayer in his eyes, just a human being who made grave mistakes and faced the consequences. In her regret, he saw a kind of humility he'd never seen before. "Take care of yourself, Emily," he said softly. "You too, Lucas." And then he left, the door clicking shut behind him, the echo of her quiet sob lingering as he walked down the hall and back out into the world. Driving back to Sonoma, Lucas felt an odd mix of sadness and relief. Sadness for the life they once had, now forever gone, and relief that he'd closed a painful chapter with dignity. He passed familiar landmarks, gas stations, roadside diners, fields rolling into vineyards. As he neared his property, the tension in his chest eased. He was going home, to a place built on honesty and growth, not illusions. Late afternoon light spilled over his farmhouse as he pulled into the driveway. Grace's car was parked out front, which surprised and pleased him. He found her in the backyard, talking quietly to Oscar, who seemed to be giving her tips on pruning techniques. They both looked up as he approached. Grace studied his face. Without a word, she sensed something significant had happened. "How was your trip?" she asked gently. Lucas took a deep breath. "I went to see Emily," he said. Oscar's eyebrows rose, but he said nothing. Grace stepped closer, placing a hand on Lucas's arm. "And?" Lucas met her gaze. "It was necessary. We talked things through. I forgave her, made it clear I've moved on. There's no anger left, just understanding." Grace's eyes softened. "I'm proud of you," she said simply. Oscar nodded as if to say he expected no less. "Closure matters," he murmured. They moved indoors and Lucas brewed some tea. The three of them sat around the kitchen table, the scent of chamomile filling the room. Lucas recounted the conversation in broad strokes, not lingering on details. Grace listened attentively, her presence a balm. Oscar sipped his tea, occasionally offering a wise nod. As dusk settled, Oscar excused himself to check something in the barn, leaving Lucas and Grace alone. Outside, the crickets chirped, and the sky turned shades of gold and pink. Grace reached across the table, took Lucas's hand in hers, and squeezed gently. "You've shown a strength that's rare," she said. "Letting go of anger, some people never manage it." Lucas laced his fingers through hers. "I had help," he said, thinking of Oscar's guidance, Mia and Jacob's love, and Grace's quiet support. The vineyard, the community, they all help me see I don't need to define my life by what Emily did. I can define it by what I do next. Grace smiled, leaning closer. And what's next? He chuckled softly. More good wine, for one. Mia and Jacob's projects, definitely. Expanding the vineyard, experimenting with your varietals, and maybe, just maybe, building something special with you. He paused, meeting her gaze. If you're open to that. She gave a slow nod. I am, she said, her voice warm. No rush, no pressure. Just honesty and forward momentum. They finished their tea as the stars emerged. Lucas felt that a door had closed on a painful past, and another door had opened to a promising future. He'd done what he needed to do, confronted the past, offered forgiveness, and kept his integrity intact. Emily's bitter end was her own journey to navigate, but for Lucas, revenge was never the main goal, it was understanding and resolution. By exposing Ryan's fraud and now speaking his truth to Emily, he'd ensured justice and closure without dragging himself back into darkness. A week later, Mia and Jacob visited again, this time with the first set of drone prototypes and detailed architectural plans for the vineyard expansions. They toured the property, excitedly pointing out where solar panels would go, how rainwater could be collected efficiently, and where the drones could launch and land. Lucas walked with them, pride swelling in his chest. You seem lighter, Dad, Mia said at one point, shading her eyes as she looked at the farmhouse. Did something happen? Lucas smiled. He hadn't told his children about his meeting with Emily yet. I saw your mom, he said calmly. Jacob looked surprised. You did? How did it go? Lucas explained briefly, no dramatic details, just that they had a calm conversation, that forgiveness was given, but no rekindling was sought. Mia's eyes glistened, and Jacob nodded thoughtfully. I'm glad you got that off your chest, Jacob said quietly. Maybe it'll help her too. Lucas rested a hand on his son's shoulder. I hope so. Either way, I'm at peace now. They ended their tour near a patch of wildflowers. Grace joined them, bringing a basket of snacks, fresh bread, cheese from Teresa, and some of her favorite Merlot. They sat on a blanket, talking about the future, the vineyard, and how they would integrate everyone's talents. Even Sophia showed up later, curious to see the drones in action. She and Jacob discussed engineering and programming, while Mia and Grace debated aesthetic choices for a new tasting room. It was a picture of a family not defined by conventional ties, but by choice, respect, and mutual healing. Emily was distant now, a figure in another life, but that no longer stung. Lucas had offered her what he could, understanding and release. As twilight fell, Sophia raised a paper cup of Merlot, just a small sip under her mother's watchful eye, and toasted, "To new beginnings and stronger families." Everyone joined in, their voices blending into a gentle chorus under the Sonoma stars. Lucas lifted his cup, heart full. He had confronted the past, found closure, and now stood on solid ground. The bitterness of Emily's betrayal had yielded to a quiet strength and a new chapter. He owed nothing more to yesterday's pain. Instead, he embraced tomorrow's promise with open hands and a steady heart. Lucas Reed stood in the early morning light, a cup of coffee warming his hands, and gazed at the rolling vineyard that now defined his life. The rows of vines shimmered with dew, and the air smelled faintly of wild herbs. Inside the farmhouse, Mia and Jacob were still asleep after arriving late last night, exhausted from their long drives. Grace and her daughter, Sophia, would join them later for a family gathering. It would be a day of quiet celebration, a toast to how far they'd all come. But before that, Lucas had one last piece of unfinished business. He pulled his phone from his pocket, scrolling to a number he hadn't dialed in years, an old contact from his tech days, a friend named Grant, who owed him a favor. Lucas wasn't a man of vengeance, but he believed in justice. Ryan Caldwell had slipped away too easily, leaving Emily in ruins. Though Lucas had long since released his anger toward Emily, he couldn't shake the thought that Ryan might lure another vulnerable person into his schemes. He pressed the call button. Grant picked up on the second ring, sounding curious and pleased to hear from him. "Lucas, wow, it's been ages," Grant said, voice crackling slightly over the line. "I heard you sold the company and moved to wine country. Living the dream, huh?" Lucas smiled wryly. "Something like that. I'm calling about a matter that needs some discretion. You still have contacts in private security and financial auditing?" Grant chuckled. "You know me. I never lost those connections. What's going on?" Lucas turned toward the vines, lowering his voice. "A man named Ryan Caldwell. He was involved with my ex-wife, no need for the messy details, but I've come to suspect he's been running small-time cons, taking women's money, promising investments that never pan out. I have a few leads from people who knew him, and I think it's time he faced consequences." Grant didn't ask for reasons. He trusted Lucas's judgment. "Send me what you have. I'll pass it along to some reputable folks who can verify his activities and put pressure in the right places. We'll make sure if he's committing fraud, it won't stay hidden." Lucas exhaled. "Thanks, Grant. I appreciate it." After ending the call, Lucas tapped out a quick email, attaching details he'd collected quietly over the months. Nothing too invasive, just some suspicious paperwork. The names of a couple of women Ryan had scammed before Emily. Enough threads for Grant's contacts to pull on. Lucas didn't plan to watch the fallout with glee. He just wanted to know that Ryan wouldn't continue leaving a trail of broken dreams behind him. Satisfied, he headed back inside. The kitchen smelled like toast and jam. Mia had woken up and was rummaging through cabinets. She grinned when she spotted him. "Morning, Dad. I'm trying to find that cinnamon honey you had last time. Did you hide it?" Lucas laughed. "Check behind the flour canister." He'd learned that Beth, the contractor who helped him with the farmhouse renovations, also kept bees as a hobby. She'd given him a jar of cinnamon, infused honey as a gift. He watched Mia spread it on whole-grain bread, her eyes lighting up at the taste. The sight filled him with warmth. After all the turmoil, this simple morning felt like a reward. Jacob shuffled into the kitchen next, yawning and rubbing his eyes. "You forget that some of us are not early risers, Dad?" he teased, pouring himself coffee. "You guys talking about honey without me?" Mia offered him a slice of toast. "We're plotting to keep it all for ourselves," she joked. They settled around the small kitchen table, eating and chatting about plans for the day. Jacob brought up the prototype drones, excited to show their progress to Grace and Sophia. Mia mentioned refining her architectural sketches for the vineyard's eco-friendly tasting area. Lucas listened, heart full. The family's energy was healing after all they had been through. Mid-morning, Grace and Sophia arrived. Lucas greeted them on the porch, where Sophia immediately launched into a conversation with Jacob about drone flight patterns. Grace smiled at Lucas, slipping her hand into his. "Everything okay?" she asked, noticing a thoughtful look in his eye. He nodded, squeezing her hand gently. "Yes, I made a call this morning, something to tie up a loose end from the past. I wanted to ensure Ryan's schemes don't continue." Grace studied him. "And how do you feel?" Lucas considered the question. He felt calm, resolved. "I feel like I'm protecting others, not out of revenge, but out of principle. Ryan took advantage of vulnerability. Now he'll face scrutiny he can't escape." Grace nodded approvingly. "I admire that. Stopping him means Emily and others can have some closure, too." They wandered toward the back patio, where a wooden table was set under a vine-covered pergola. Mia and Jacob brought out pitchers of water infused with lemon and mint, a bowl of fresh strawberries, and a platter of cheeses from Teresa's creamery. Sophia placed wildflowers in a small vase as a centerpiece, humming softly. The scene looked like a snapshot from a slow-motion film, sunlight filtering through leaves, everyone moving at a gentle pace, as if savoring the moment. After lunch, Jacob led them all out to a newly cleared patch of land. "I'm thinking we can station the drones here," he said, gesturing with enthusiasm. "They'll map soil moisture, vine health, and even spot pests early. We could tie the data into Mia's solar-powered irrigation system." Mia nodded. "And we can design a small shelter for the drones, a minimalist structure that blends with the landscape. Maybe a green roof with succulents, so it doesn't distract from the vineyard's natural beauty." Grace tapped her chin thoughtfully. "I like it. The future of wine production merging traditional viticulture with modern tech. My ex-husband would have scoffed, but I think this is brilliant. Sophia shrugged, grinning. Change is good, Mom. Besides, drones are cool. Everyone laughed, the tension of old wounds absent. They spent an hour walking through the property, imagining new projects and improvements. Mia mentioned adding walking paths for future visitors, Jacob talked about installing sensors for climate data, and Sophia suggested a small reading nook near the vineyard's edge, where guests could sip wine and browse books on local history. Lucas watched them interact, heart swelling with pride. He caught Grace's eye and she smiled, understanding passing between them. This was a family, maybe an unconventional one, but united by trust, creativity, and honest affection. The scars of betrayal and loss had faded into lessons learned. In the late afternoon, as they drifted back toward the farmhouse, Lucas's phone buzzed again. He glanced at the screen. A text from Grant. Got confirmation. Caldwell's activities exposed to relevant parties. He'll be fired and flagged from finance sector opportunities. Good call. Talk soon. Lucas slipped the phone back into his pocket, feeling a quiet satisfaction. Ryan would no longer find it easy to prey on anyone's hopes. Emily might never know the details, but she would sense that Ryan's fall from grace was inevitable, a karmic balance restoring order. As the evening settled, they prepared a casual dinner. Mia chopped fresh vegetables from Karen and Bill's farm next door. Jacob lit lanterns around the patio. Grace uncorked a bottle of wine, one of her new blends, light and floral, perfect for a warm evening. Sophia arranged plates, humming a tune Lucas didn't recognize. Oscar appeared, drawn by the laughter, carrying a small basket of ripe figs he'd picked that morning. He declined an invitation to stay for dinner, but he lingered just long enough to offer Lucas a knowing nod and a wink, as if to say, well done. When everyone was seated, Grace lifted her glass. The lantern light danced over their faces, and a gentle breeze ruffled the vines. To new beginnings and stronger families, she said. It echoed Sophia's earlier toast, now resonating even deeper. They clinked glasses, taking a slow sip, letting the moment sink in. After dinner, as twilight draped the vineyard in soft blue light, they moved chairs closer, forming a loose circle. Mia and Jacob told stories about their childhood times when Lucas took them camping, or how Emily used to cook big Sunday breakfasts before things changed. They didn't dwell on the past's pain. Instead, they honored the good memories. Grace and Sophia listened, occasionally sharing tidbits of their own history, how Sophia learned to ride a bike in this very region, how Grace once dreamed of restoring the vineyard differently, but lacked the courage until now. Lucas felt his throat tighten with emotion. He had forgiven Emily. He had confronted Ryan's wrongdoing. He had found love and purpose again. The bitterness that once defined his life was gone, replaced by a steady warmth. He glanced at Grace, who smiled encouragingly. She understood what this moment meant to him, closure and renewal intertwined. Eventually, Mia excused herself to call Daniel, her fiancé, and describe the progress at the vineyard. Jacob took Sophia aside to discuss drone camera calibrations. That left Lucas and Grace momentarily alone, watching the silhouettes of their children against the fading light. Grace leaned her head against Lucas's shoulder. You've done so much here, she said softly. Not just physically, with the land, but emotionally. You've created a space for healing. Lucas pressed a kiss to her temple. I couldn't have done it alone. You, Oscar, Mia, Jacob, and even Emily and Ryan, every player had a role. Without the pain, I wouldn't have found this strength. Without leaving my old life, I wouldn't have discovered this peace. Grace turned to meet his gaze. Do you think about Emily now? She asked, not jealous, just curious. He considered the question. I do, but differently. I think of her as someone who taught me that security and comfort aren't guaranteed. I don't regret the years we spent there were good times, but I'm not haunted anymore. I've forgiven her, and that's freed me. Grace nodded, satisfied. Forgiveness is a rare gift. They fell silent, listening to the night sounds, crickets chirping, a distant owl hooting. It felt like the world had slowed down to let them savor this peace. The vineyard's contours faded into shadow. the lantern's soft glow enough to outline the shapes of friends and family moving gently through the space. Later, Sophia returned to the table, holding a book she'd found inside the farmhouse, a local history of Sonoma's vineyards. She flipped through pages, pointing out old photographs and telling stories she'd heard from neighbors. Mia rejoined them, mentioning Daniel might visit next month. Jacob mused about converting one of the old barns into a small lab for testing soil samples. Each idea, each plan, was a stitch weaving their lives together. Lucas excused himself briefly, stepping inside. In the den, he opened a drawer containing Emily's letter from months ago, the one expressing gratitude for his understanding and the financial means that had helped her survive. He hadn't read it since placing it there. Now, he ran a finger over the envelope, acknowledging that chapter was closed. He wouldn't shred it or discard it. It was part of his story, a reminder that forgiveness was possible. Smiling to himself, he closed the drawer gently, sealing that part of his past inside. When he returned to the patio, Mia teased him. "Dad, you're missing out. Jacob's explaining drone camera angles for the third time. It's riveting," she joked, wrinkling her nose. Jacob shot her a mock glare. "Hey, I'm trying to enlighten everyone." Grace laughed softly, and Sophia rolled her eyes good-naturedly. Lucas resumed his seat, content to listen as the conversation drifted and meandered, like a gentle stream flowing where it pleased. As the night grew deeper, the stars came out in full force, scattered across the sky like scattered pearls. The distant hum of a neighbor's tractor finishing late chores added a comforting rhythm. They talked about the future. Maybe Mia and Jacob could design a visitor's center. Perhaps Grace and Lucas could launch a small label blending their grapes, something that symbolized unity and resilience. Sophia suggested naming a wine after an old Sonoma legend she'd read about. Everyone laughed at her creative ideas. In a pause between stories, Lucas took a moment to absorb the scene. He'd arrived in Sonoma broken and uncertain, leaving behind a life that had fallen apart. Now he was surrounded by people who mattered, building something that blended tradition with innovation. There was mystery still in the air, a slow, deliberate unfolding of what their new lives would become. The tone felt like a Gillian Flynn story in slow motion, except instead of dread, there was steady anticipation, a dramatic hush that preceded growth and renewal rather than disaster. He realized that every action he had taken selling the company, confronting Emily, trusting his children's visions, opening his heart to Grace had led him to this exact evening, a place where bitterness transformed into understanding, where revenge morphed into justice, and where isolation gave way to community. At some point, tired and happy, they began tidying up. Mia gathered empty glasses, Jacob blew out lanterns, Sophia hummed a quiet tune as she folded the tablecloth. Grace placed a hand on Lucas's back, guiding him inside. They said goodnight to Mia and Jacob, who settled into their guest rooms, and to Sophia, who wandered off with a book in hand, promising to help with breakfast tomorrow. Now alone in the farmhouse's living room, Lucas and Grace stood by a window looking out at the moonlit vines. Grace slipped her arm through his, resting her head against his shoulder. "Today felt like a new chapter," she said softly. Lucas nodded. "It did. Everything feels aligned, our families, our plans, even the land itself." She reached up and kissed him gently. "Whatever comes next, we face it together." He smiled, letting her words sink in. Outside, a mild breeze stirred the leaves. His phone, resting on a side table, lay silent now, no urgent calls from the past, no ghosts to confront. The vineyard's quiet hum was all he needed. In that stillness, Lucas knew he'd emerged from his trials wiser, kinder, and more open to love. Emily's betrayal had hurt him deeply, but he'd learned that healing was possible, and that revenge needn't be cruel. Ensuring Ryan's downfall had been a matter of principle, done without malice, just a final step in protecting others. Forgiving Emily allowed him to move forward without resentment weighing him down. Meeting Grace had taught him that broken hearts could mend, and families could be reshaped into something new and beautiful. They extinguished the last lights and went upstairs, leaving the vineyard to the night and the gentle watch of the stars. Tomorrow would bring more work, tending vines, refining plans, maybe tasting a new batch of wine. Life would continue at its own pace, mysterious, dramatic, slow, but always moving toward growth. Before drifting to sleep, Lucas let his mind wander over the day's highlights. The quiet confidence of Mia and Jacob, the honest warmth of Grace and Sophia, the stable presence of Oscar, and the supportive friendships formed in Sonoma. This was his life now, anchored not in bitterness but in hope. The family gathering at the vineyard had proven that new beginnings were not only possible, but could be stronger than what came before. The next morning the sun would rise over the vines again, and Lucas would greet it with gratitude, secure in the knowledge that the past had been laid to rest and the future awaited them all with open arms. The end.